short staff by it.
I know. The big time. I see. I kicked him out. Is that the judge?
Oh, see, nice enough guy to talk to.
You guys ready? All rise.
Thank you for standing. Please be seated. I'm Judge Rodman. I'm calling Flagstaff Justice Court case number PO 2023-133, Wendy Rogers versus Cameron Sanchez. And counsel, would you please introduce yourselves and your clients?
Sure. Good afternoon, Your Honor. William Fischbach and Mitch Intellis on behalf of the plaintiff, Wendy Rogers.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Christopher Hennessy on behalf of the defendant, Cameron Sanchez.
And this is the time set for a contested hearing at Ms. Sanchez's request, contesting ex parte injunction against harassment that was previously issued. Mr. Fischbach, do you want to make an opening statement?
I don't believe so, Your Honor. It's an expedited hearing, so I'd just like to move right into the evidence if I could.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Hennessy?
That's fine, Your Honor.
All right. What would you like to present?
I'd like to start with Senator Wendy Rogers, if I could, Your Honor.
Okay, if you'd come forward. And raise your right hand. You swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter would be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay, have a seat. Yeah. Actually be about a foot away from it. It can overwhelm the record if you talk closely. Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Could we please have your full name for the record?
Senator Wendy Rogers.
And as you just indicated, I believe you're a member of the Arizona Senate.
That's correct.
Senator Rogers, you know why we're here today, but just so we have a good, clean record, we're here today because you obtained an ex parte injunction against harassment against Ms. Cameron Sanchez.
That's correct.
Is she here in the courtroom here today?
Yes.
Is she seated at the defendant's table with counsel?
Yes.
All right. I realize that we're here really to focus on specific incidents of harassment alleged in your petition, but I do think it would be helpful for the court if the court understood the history of your dealings with Ms. Sanchez. And so if I could, I would like to start with an incident back in January of 2022 involving yourself, Ms. Sanchez, on the Senate floor. Could you please tell us what happened there?
I was reminded by a clip that I recently stumbled across that helped me remember the fact that in January of 2022, Ms. Sanchez approached my table on the Senate floor and tried to question me. The rules of engagement are that once the gavel falls and the Senate session is over for the day, reporters can approach us at our table. I did not appreciate her questions.
They cannot approach you at your table once the gavel. I missed what you said.
They can't approach.
They can approach.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Once the gavel falls.
Once the gavel
and
falls.
the session is over for the day.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So she approached me as is custom, and the questions were inappropriate, uncomfortable for me at the time. I did not appreciate her approach. I asked the staff to have her not approach me anymore.
Well, can you explain what her demeanor was like to you in asking those questions?
I was made uncomfortable by my space, as it were, being invaded. I did not feel comfortable in terms of I felt that she was imposing herself upon me and in my work area. And so I said I did not want to be questioned by her again, and I told the staff to instruct her accordingly.
And is it fair to say during this particular encounter you felt as though your physical space had been invaded?
Object to form leading.
It is leading. The rules of evidence don't exactly apply in this type of proceeding.
Understood, Your Honor.
But
I'm
we get
happy.
better information if the witness is testifying rather than counsel.
I'm happy to rephrase, Judge.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Senator Rogers, could you please explain, what Ms. Sanchez did relative to your own personal space during that encounter in January of 2022?
And actually, Your Honor, I'm going to object again, not necessarily with respect to the rules of evidence, but as you're aware, Your Honor, the proceedings today are limited to the scope of the petition that was filed and the hearing that took place on April 19th.
Well, let me flip to the petition. I remember there was reference, well, not to the January 22. The rules of protective order procedure do limit testimony to and evidence presented to what is alleged in the petition. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to sustain that objection unless you have a response.
Yeah, Judge, if I could, I believe the rule you're citing has to do with the actual incidents of harassment themselves, meaning you can't come forward with new incidents of harassment that aren't in the petition. What I'm just doing here is merely adding some color to the relationship between the parties.
No, and Your Honor, the whole issue is precisely that, this notion of adding color. That which is contained in the petition, on page 2 of the petition, well, first of all, question number 4, tell the judge what happened and why you need this order. Defendant will receive it. If there's a contested hearing, a judge can consider only what you write here. And on page 2, there's one entry from 2022, which I presume is the issue being discussed for January 2022. In 2022, Ms. Sanchez was verbally forbidden to approach me at the Arizona Senate.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all that's contained in the petition, Your Honor. That limits the scope of that which can be discussed at this hearing.
No, our record stopped. It needs to be rehabilitated.
Yeah, just slide it right to the back corner. We're done. Thank you very much.
Should I actually have her witness too? Okay. Actually, I'm being told that it should move a little closer to you, 6 inches. We've had experiences where people talk right in the mic, and then we can't make a record of the hearing. So that's what I was fearing, but it's attorneys are not near the mic. Do you want me to have them? Well, he's walking around. Do you want me to have him question from his desk? Oh, that mic. Okay. Perfect. Okay. I'm hearing that the Zoom call is not necessarily picking up everything you're saying. So, question from close to the mic.
And, Your Honor, it would ordinarily be my practice to stand up to make objections. If you'd rather me sit so that I can speak, it's up to you. You tell me what you want.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
It doesn't matter to me.
All right.
We're on? Okay, the rule referenced is Rule 36 of the Rules of Protective Order Procedure. It says the court must limit the scope of the hearing to the allegations of the petition. The petition does reference the events that the witness is talking about, and so I'm going to overrule the objection. You can go forward.
Thank you, Your Honor. I maybe can't remember what my last question was, but if you could explain, going back to this incident of January of 2022 that's referenced in your petition, how did you feel relative to Ms. Sanchez and your personal space during that incident?
To answer your question, I felt that my personal space was being violated and imposed upon, and I was not comfortable. Therefore, I instructed the staff to tell her to not approach me anymore after session would be over on a daily basis.
And do you know if that message was communicated to Ms. Sanchez?
I do not know specifically, but I presumed that it had been by her not having approached me again throughout the rest of the session. We start in January, we go into June.
And during that January of 2022 incident, did you yourself communicate anything to Ms. Sanchez, signaling that you did not wish to communicate with her or engage with her?
I did at that, on that date when she approached, and I did not want to be questioned. I told her I did not want to be questioned, and then thereupon I instructed the staff to also reinforce that with her.
Let's now go to February of 2023. It's my understanding there was another incident between yourself and Ms. Sanchez on the Senate floor. Please tell us what happened there, ma'am.
I was surprised that she would approach me since we had established the standard the year before. And so when she approached me, I believe it was on a Monday in late February, I was gathering my belongings, and she strode right up into my personal space. I sit in the very back row now, so I'm in the very back of the Senate floor, and staff people tend to congregate around there as well. So when she strode toward me and said something to the effect of, "I want to talk to you about your Senate Elections Committee," I thought to myself, well, I will just continue to put my belongings together because she should know better than to have approached me. And then another question was posed by her. As I was gathering my belongings, she said, "Did you take bribes?" At that point, I was speechless. I looked at the public relations professional we have on staff, Ms. Kim Quintero, and then she looked at Ms. Sanchez and said something to the effect of, "Senator Rogers put out a press release under the Arizona Senate yesterday evening, Sunday evening, that answers all questions related to the Senate Elections Committee." And at this point, there were, I think, 3 staff members kind of gathering around me to assist. And Ms. Sanchez would not leave my desk.
What happened next?
I was, again, incredulous that she was still there. So I looked at her and I said, "You're dismissed."
Now, Senator Rogers, you're a veteran, as am I. What did you mean to communicate to Ms. Sanchez by saying you're dismissed?
When you say you're dismissed to someone, it's the final remark you say to someone to convey that the business at hand is over and you need to vacate the premise.
What happened after you told her you're dismissed?
She did finally back off, and then a few hours later, as I was driving away from the Capitol, I had a one-on-one conversation with each of the 3 staff members who, at that point, had congregated around the situation. I spoke one-on-one with the Sergeant at Arms. I spoke one-on-one with Ms. Quintero, and I spoke one-on-one with the Deputy Chief of Staff, Grant Hannon. And in each of those conversations, on my way out, I said, "Did we not make ourselves clear here? that last year, Ms. Sanchez was told not to approach me anymore. And now we have this problem again this year. And in each of those cases, each of the staff members
Objection,
said,
call for hearsay.
Hearsay is allowed.
Okay.
Thank you, Betty. Please continue.
in each of those conversations, each person said to me something to the effect of, "You're right, we will reaffirm this understanding. Sorry this happened. This won't happen again."
And going back to this issue of your personal space, explain to us again how you felt relative to Ms. Sanchez in your personal space during this encounter in February of 2023.
My personal space on the Senate floor is my workplace. I do the business of the people who are in this room, Flagstaff, all the way down to Oracle. That's the people's seat. That's where I go to represent them. That's where they elected me to serve. I hold that place as a sacred position. And if someone comes in at me and is invading my space, they're not only infringing upon me, they're infringing upon my district and my people. We have to have respect in the Arizona Senate.
And ma'am, could you describe for the court just how close Ms. Sanchez was getting to you relative to your own personal space?
I would say within 3 feet.
And how would you describe the demeanor of her questions?
The demeanor of her questions had a very assertive, directive, forward-leaning air that made it apparent that it was my job to answer her.
Would you describe it as hostile?
Objection.
I mean, it's out there now,
Yeah.
but sustained.
Withdrawn, Judge. Just so we have a good, clean record, I want to kind of just briefly help the court understand the physical differences between you and Ms. Sanchez. What is your approximate weight and height?
I'm about 5'5" and I weigh about 125.
All right, and you know, how does Ms. Sanchez compare to you in terms of physical stature?
Ms. Sanchez is taller than I, very athletic build, weighs far more than I do.
I want to go to two incidents that occurred in April of this year relative to Ms. Sanchez going to your personal residences in Tempe and Chandler. Just so we're clear, you have a home in Tempe you're getting ready to sell, and then a home in Chandler you're getting ready to move into?
That's correct. Those of us who represent rural districts have to have 2 homes. I have a home here in Flagstaff I've had since 2015, and I have a home near the Capitol. For many years, that home, quote-unquote, near the Capitol has been in Tempe. We are selling that home and moving to a home in Chandler to be near the Capitol, and that's what is ensuing right now.
Tell us about it. Did you receive notice sometime on April 18th that Ms. Sanchez was at the Tempe home?
Yes, I was up here at home in Flagstaff. We had a break from the Senate for about a week and a half or so, so I came home. And then I received a text from my family member that showed a Ring doorbell picture of Ms. Sanchez on the Tempe home doorstep. I was immediately asked, "Who is this?" And I explained to my family member, my husband, who it was.
And who was it?
It was Ms. Sanchez.
Just give me one moment while the court reporter marks these exhibits here.
Okay.
Ma'am, I'm going to hand you what have been marked as exhibits 1 and 2. I believe exhibit 2 is you have a Ring camera at your home in Tempe and also with the one in Chandler?
Yes,
Does exhibit 2 depict the Ring video footage from Ms. Sanchez being at your home in Tempe on April 18th.
Yes.
Did you ever give Ms. Sanchez permission to go to your personal residence?
No.
All right. Did you ever suggest anything to her that she was invited to come by your personal residence?
No.
Did you ever give her your Tempe address?
No.
Do you publicize your Tempe address?
No.
When you saw Ms. Sanchez there at the Tempe residence, what did you do after that?
I was alarmed, and I began to get advice from my leadership at the Senate, and I started researching advice on what to do about having my private residence visited by someone who was expressly forbidden to approach me at the office.
What did you do next?
I went about my business during the day, and then I think not long after here, according to the exhibits, it is apparent that within an hour, I received another text from my spouse showing that Ms. Sanchez was appearing on the Ring doorbell footage picture at the Chandler house. I also got a text from an across-the-street neighbor at the Chandler neighborhood saying that he had been visited ostensibly by Ms. Sanchez.
And Exhibit 1 depicts Ms. Sanchez at the Chandler home?
That's correct.
What did you do after you learned that Ms. Sanchez had now gone to your Chandler home in addition to your Tempe home?
After the two images came across my text phone, I was very alarmed and began to research even more what my options were. At that point, I pursued the notion of getting a restraining order, harassment injunction against harassment.
And just so we're clear, did you ever invite Ms. Sanchez to come to your Chandler home?
No.
Have you ever published the address of your Chandler home?
No.
Is your personal privacy a concern for you as a member of the legislature?
Absolutely, yes.
Why is that?
I'm a target, as all of us are. I have 3 colleagues here up from the Capitol to support me today.
And Judge, if I could, I would like to move Exhibits 1 and 2 of the evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Tennessee?
No objection.
Okay, they will be admitted.
Yes.
In the recent past, have you been, and don't mean to suggest Ms. Sanchez had anything to do with it, but just so the court understands your state of mind, in the recent past, have you been the subject of a death threat?
Objection beyond the scope.
Again, Judge, part of our burden here is to show that she was in fact alarmed, harassed, or annoyed subjectively.
I agree with that. Objections overruled. She has to be alarmed personally under the definition of harassment in
Thank you, Your Honor.
1909.
And again, not to suggest that Ms. Sanchez had anything to do with this, but have you recently been the subject of a death threat?
Yes, I have been recently subject to a death threat. 2022, July 4th, Congressman Eli Crane and I were in a parade in Show Low, Arizona, which is in my district. July 4th, later in the afternoon, an email came in over the website of the Trump store in Show Low saying, the sender of the email said he had Wendy Rogers' head in the target crosshairs of his weapon, who he allegedly was posturing from Sonic Burger next door, said he was going to splash Wendy Rogers' bleepity brains all over the Trump store. I was immediately evacuated once that message came in. Later in the day on July 4th, I came home to Flagstaff. 6 weeks later, it was determined by DPS, who has the oversight of my safety, that it was Donald Brown, who is a middle school teacher in the Tucson Unified School District.
And Mr. Brown was subsequently indicted, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, I believe he's getting ready. He interviewed a guilty plea, and he's due to stand for sentencing here in the next couple of weeks.
My understanding is Donald Brown will be sentenced in Navajo County, I think in June 6th.
All right, thank you very much. Judge, what I have here are exhibits 3 and 4 relative to Mr. Brown's case. I would just ask the court to get those, take judicial notice of them, just so the court understands the nature of the death threat, and that, to show that, Ms. Rogers does in fact take these issues very seriously.
Any objection to those being admitted?
Absolutely, Your Honor. This is setting aside far beyond the scope. We're now entering documents in this, for the public record of something that never came up in the context of the petition.
I agree, I'm not going to. I believe that she's genuinely concerned for her safety.
Okay. Thank you, Judge.
I don't need to read these.
As long as you made the
I've
point,
heard
Judge,
her.
I appreciate it. Has Ms. Sanchez ever emailed you a request for an interview before?
Not to my knowledge.
All right. Has she ever made public records requests relative to your role as a senator here in the state of Arizona?
Yes,
All right. Has she made other inquiries amongst your colleagues relative to your role as a senator here in Arizona?
I don't know.
Judge, I believe that's all the questions I have.
Okay, Mr. Hennessy, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. I'm sorry, just quickly, Your Honor, the 1 and 2, I just want to make sure I have these correct.
1 and 2, I think 2 was Tempe and 1 was Chandler.
One. Thank you, Your Honor.
And,
Do you want me to bring my microphone over this way?
I wonder if you can.
You can use
that
mine.
Microphone.
I'll,
Maybe hard to hear your objections, but,
I can project, Judge. Thank you.
okay.
Good afternoon, Senator Rogers.
Good afternoon.
Few things I want to cover, just briefly, that council was addressing. The address of your Tempe home and your Chandler home, did you buy those in a different name than your own? The residences?
I don't think so.
Okay. So any public record that would exist regarding the transactions associated with either the Tempe residence or Chandler residence would include your name?
Presumably.
Okay. You acknowledged, I believe already, that Ms. Sanchez is a reporter. My client's a reporter for the Arizona Capital Times. He's at the Senate on a daily basis, correct?
Correct.
Are you familiar with the rules of the Senate governing members of the media?
Yes.
And I think you described that the reporters can approach you after the gavel, correct?
Correct.
And the incident that you described taking place in January 2022 occurred after the gavel.
Correct.
So there was no violation of any rule there of Ms. Sanchez approaching you.
Correct.
I believe you also said that, I wrote this down, it's as is custom. In other words, it's custom that reporters would approach senators after the gavel has come down to ask questions. Is that
Correct.
Okay. So it sounds like really you just didn't appreciate her questions and you felt as though your personal space was being invaded. Is that right?
Negative. You've conflated two notions there. The content is one thing, and the feeling of my space being invaded is another, and that is what I have said I felt.
Okay, great. Well, let's break that down. We've got the issue associated with that which she said, right, the content. That upset you, right?
I don't recall what it was, but I did not think it respectful or appropriate.
But you understood that she was approaching you in the context of her position as a reporter who works at the state capitol.
Affirmative.
And then there was the issue about your physical space. That's different than your not appreciating the questions, right?
Correct.
All right. I want to hand you the document. I was gonna have to.
I wasn't in here when you were.
It was going to be one or both of us eventually.
So are we doing this just sequentially, Ron? The exhibits? We're not doing plaintiff and defendant, just
Yeah, no, do it, your exhibit.
Defendant's
exhibit, yeah, defendant's one.
Commissioner Cochran?
Sure.
All right. Senator Rogers, I'm going to hand you a document that's been marked as defendant exhibit 1. I ask you to please take a look at that document. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
This is a document that you completed on April 19th, 2023. That was your petition requesting the injunction against harassment, correct?
Correct.
And you filled this out yourself?
Yes.
And you signed this under penalty of perjury?
Correct.
All right. You then proceeded to have a hearing at the court on April 19th, correct?
I believe so, if that's the date of this, yes.
Do you recall the exchange that took place at that hearing?
I do.
Sorry. Here's another document marked Defense Exhibit 2. A transcript from the hearing that took place on April 19th. And ask you some questions about your testimony that took place at the hearing on April 19th. During the course of that hearing, how many times did you use when you're just to set the stage, you showed up for a hearing on April 19th, you were here with the magistrate judge, it was the two of you, and you explained to the magistrate judge the basis behind the petition, that which was contained in Defense Exhibit 1, correct?
Yes.
And you answered a number of questions, you explained yourself, you explained your concerns to the magistrate judge in order to obtain the injunction against harassment, correct?
Yes.
All right. During that hearing on April 19th, how many times did you use the word fear?
I don't recall.
Well, there's a word index at the back of Exhibit 2. Feel free to look it up.
I do not see fear listed.
Great. Let's try a different word. How many times during the course of the hearing on April 19th did you tell the magistrate that you were afraid?
I do not see afraid.
How many times during the hearing on April 19th did you tell the magistrate judge that you felt intimidated by Ms. Sanchez at the events in the Senate?
I didn't say intimidated, and I would not have said intimidated.
Because you weren't intimidated?
Intimidated connotes someone having an upper hand in a debate format, and that's not what that was.
Okay, well then I'm sorry, maybe I'm confused. You were describing the difference, you were asked questions and described the difference between your height and weight, your physical dimensions, and the differential between the physical dimensions between you and Ms. Sanchez, and I'm trying to understand the purpose of that testimony, unless it was to suggest some manner of physical intimidation. Did you feel physically intimidated?
I felt my space was being violated. That isn't necessarily synonymous with intimidation.
Okay.
I don't intimidate easily.
How many times during the course of the hearing on April 19th did you tell the magistrate judge
And
that...
for the record, it was actually a justice of peace pro tem.
I'm sorry.
Even though the media were representing it as the magistrate judge, it was actually a justice of peace pro tem.
All right. I apologize.
That's
for
okay,
for
that's
that.
all right. I just want to clarify that.
All right.
Possible misconception.
Maybe I'll just call it a hearing and we'll be safer. How many times at the hearing on April 19th did you tell the Justice of the Peace that you believe that there were threats to your family?
I don't recall.
How many times during the course of the hearing on April 19th did you discuss the factual circumstances surrounding Donald Brown and a threat to your life?
I don't recall.
You can look at the word edits. It's in there. Go
Look
ahead.
up
Look at the word.
Donald?
Sure.
I don't see Donald.
Okay. You can also look up threaten to your family too as well. Just the word
Thank
edits is
you.
very helpful that way. And we document this from Martha's Defense Exhibit 3 for application. You recognize the document as Martha's Defense Exhibit 3.
I do.
This is a press release. Did you author this document?
Yes, I approved it.
And there are quotes in here. Are those quotes things that you said?
Yes,
All right. And this is dated Thursday, April 20. Correct?
it is.
Let's see, some quotes of yours in here. I don't know this reporter personally. You said that? Correct?
I did.
I don't know what she is capable of. You said that too? Correct?
Correct.
That you don't believe anyone in their right mind would show up uninvited to my home. Correct? Right?
I'm reading just to reconfirm. Wait a minute. This is, yes, okay. That's correct.
And then finally, that last sentence in that second paragraph, that you don't trust that this person would lash out and try to physically harm me in some fashion. Those are your words on April 20th, right?
Yes,
All right. And safe to say, and please refer to Defense Exhibit 2 if you need to, that you never told the judge pro tem about concerns about lashing out or physical harm. Is that correct?
that's correct. However, there are uses by me of the word annoying, harass, harassed, harassing, and harassment. Just looking cursorily at this index of words.
So what you're saying there, the index of words, it's those words appear within the transcript. You don't know right now whether you said them or the judge said them, correct?
I don't know, but I certainly would have and did think those words.
Okay. Well, let's talk about words that we know you used. Despite the fact that you didn't say anything about your personal space, you didn't say anything about threats to your family, you didn't say anything about concerns or fear or being afraid, you didn't say anything about Mr. Brown, I guess it was, if I recall his name correctly, in some sort of an attempt in regard. Let's talk about the things that we know that you talked about. For example, you made it a point to talk about how much you wanted to make sure that this injunction went on Ms. Sanchez's record, whatever that means. And if you want to see it, page 15, lines 9 to 11, Exhibit 2. You made it a point to the judge to ask about whether the proceeding that you engaged in on April 19th would go on Ms. Sanchez's record. So you didn't want to talk about fear, you want to talk about Ms. Sanchez's record.
May I address your question?
You can answer my question.
What is your question?
My question is, it's true that during the course of the hearing that took place on the 19th, the one word we know you did use, the one phrase you did bring up was the concept of whether the proceedings would go against Ms. Sanchez's record. You made it a point to ask that question, correct?
What word are you saying I used to convey such a concept?
Well, page 15, lines 9 through 11. Ms. Rogers, and this goes on her sort of record, so to speak, and that she has, okay, what implications does that have?
And your question regarding that?
That you made it a point during a proceeding seeking an injunction against harassment where you didn't talk about your personal safety, where you didn't talk about threats to your family, where you didn't talk about this Mr. Brown. You did make it a point to ask about the implications for Ms. Sanchez, correct?
I asked the judge, the pro tem,
judge is fine.
a number of questions that day. One was what kind of implication this has in general. This was not a personal sort of aim at the defendant as you're portraying it. I also asked the judge about my addresses and whether or not they should be entered into the public record, because we just passed legislation recently, the governor signed the other day, that speaks to the danger of elected officials' addresses being in the public record.
Okay, you answered my question. No, move to strike. No, it's not responsive. You answered the questions that were asked.
Your lawyer will have an opportunity to ask you redirect questions.
Very well.
So just to confirm, if I understand correctly, your questions regarding the record for Ms. Sanchez was your concern for her wanting to make sure that it didn't implicate her negatively. Is that your suggestion now?
No.
Okay. And actually going on page 15, line 23, page 15, out of the top of 16. So the idea here, this is you speaking, so the idea here is for the person to learn their lesson and then leave the situation alone. So you made it a point to bring up wanting Ms. Sanchez to learn her lesson despite the fact that you didn't talk about your personal safety, correct?
No.
You didn't say that?
That wasn't your question. You said you spoke to intent with your question of me. I will speak objectively to the statement, which, yes, I did say. And in that statement, I simply reiterated what I understood the court's ruling would have an impact on. What does a court do? A court teaches lessons, and that's all I was saying.
Let's also talk about the scope of that which you the scope of which you were asking regarding the events that took place in the implications of this injunction. The concern that Ms. Sanchez couldn't approach you at all, correct?
I'm not sure the specificity of your question.
Page 14, lines 3 to 5. Ms. Rogers, so if I'm 5 miles away at an event that a lot of us are at, she cannot approach me, correct?
That, again, was a question I had to sort of be coached by the judge in terms of what my parameters of safety would be.
Because going back to Defense Exhibit 1, you had actually asked initially that Ms. Sanchez be banned from not only any residences, but also from the Senate floor completely.
That's correct.
Yeah, sounds like
On April 18th and April 19th, when there were visits that took place by Ms. Sanchez at the Tempe Channel residences, were you at either place?
No.
Was your husband at either place?
Back and forth he was.
At the time Ms. Sanchez arrived at each residence, was your husband there?
No.
Do you recall receiving an email from Ms. Sanchez on April 17th, 2023, asking you for comment regarding the,
Give me the date again, please.
Sure, April 17, 2023,
Okay.
an email asking about the latest subsistence and mileage report from your office?
I do not recall that email. We were on break. I was up here. I was not checking my email. However, we do have an attorney at the Senate who apprises me of public records requests. So if it was one of those, he might have passed that to me.
What is a subsistence and mileage report?
A subsistence and mileage report, to my understanding, is an accounting of what the Senate pays a senator for subsistence and mileage.
So there's a report that your office would complete to submit for part of a request for per diem under the applicable Arizona statute.
Presumably.
And in order for, you've been receiving per diem reimbursements during your time in the Senate.
Yes?
And those per diem reimbursements are based upon the distance between Flagstaff and the state capital.
My understanding is they're based on the fact that one has to have 2 homes and one has to commute, yes, from outside Maricopa County.
But nonetheless, the reimbursement, because you're the senator from Flagstaff, your per diem reimbursement and the mileage associated with that would be covering the distance between Flagstaff and Phoenix.
When that travel is accomplished. However, when we are in session, we have to have accommodation near the Capitol, so it helps cover that expense as well.
And that's the residence you have in Tempe that'll be moved to the residence in Chandler.
That is where I hail from, yes, when I am near the Capitol.
Okay. You haven't moved into the Chandler home, correct?
Correct.
All right. Between Tempe and Flagstaff, which one of those is your primary residence? The one you spend the most time? I'm sorry?
Flagstaff is my primary residence.
Did you recall receiving a text message from, actually before I get to that, who's Kim Quintero?
As I stated earlier, she is the Senate Public Relations liaison for the Senate Majority staff.
Do you recall receiving a text message, and presumably you had your phone with you even though you were on break, a text message from Kim Quintero on Monday, April 17, between the hours of 1:43 p.m. and 3:56 p.m. that was a cut and paste of a text message from Ms. Sanchez to Ms. Quintero that Ms. Quintero passed down to you?
It's possible. I don't recall for sure.
Maybe I'll read the text message to you and we'll see if that helps you. Hand you a document marked Exhibit 4. Take a look at the box that says hello. Hello, I want to talk to Rogers about some things she might really want to comment on. She recently purchased a house in Chandler, and there's some more information about the rumors of her residing out of district in Tempe. Also keeping that in mind, I'd like to ask her about per diem. Thanks. Kim's response, I don't know anything about that. However, I do know she will want to comment. Nonetheless, I will screenshot your text and send it to her. Back from Ms. Sanchez, think you have to ask. And then Ms. Quintero, I know, no worries. Later that day, Ms. Sanchez, please shoot me a text if and when she says no, so I can add. Not sure if this will be published today, but maybe. And then finally back from Ms. Quintero, 3:56 p.m., no reply, suggesting that Ms. Quintero passed the text message on to you and you hadn't replied. Does that help you remember whether you received that message?
This looks familiar, but I don't recall it specifically, honestly.
Okay. So, as of April 17th, if in fact that message had come through, and you said it looks familiar, you would have known that Ms. Sanchez was seeking comment from you about your residence and also questions regarding per diem, correct?
Presumably.
How many times during the hearing on April 19th did you tell the judge that Ms. Sanchez was looking into or investigating your residences related to per diem?
I wouldn't have felt that was relevant.
When the judge was asking you about the normalcy associated with a reporter coming to a residence, you didn't think it would be important for the judge to understand your knowledge that in fact Ms. Sanchez was undergoing an investigation into your residences and your per diem. It could then very well have explained why it was she was going to the residences. You didn't think that was something important for the judge to know.
No explanation justifies someone coming to my private residence whether or not I answer their inquiry on text.
How many times have you run for public office in the city of Arizona?
Yeah, Judge, objection relevance.
I promise I'll tie it, Your Honor.
I'll allow it.
Are we counting primary and general or cycles?
Any time that there will be a name on a ballot.
I will generalize that answer to say I have run in 6 cycles.
Okay. And during those cycles, I presume you had campaign staff.
It would depend on the scope of the campaign, but I'm a frugal campaigner, so very few staff, if any.
Did you go out and search for those yourself?
Affirmative. I've knocked on tens of thousands of doors, more than you can imagine.
Did all those people invite you to knock on your door?
I went as a campaigner, and they could have said to leave if possible. What I would do is leave my card and identify myself as someone who is campaigning for office. I was not seeking investigation into their affairs.
And that's the key distinction for you there.
An invasion of privacy is the key distinction.
No, hold on a second. I thought what you said was so offensive to you was uninvited to your home. You said you got, what it was? I'm sorry.
After being told not to approach me.
Hold on. You said tens of thousands of homes. You knocked on tens of thousands of doors.
Yes.
And you weren't invited to any of them. Right?
Are you suggesting that a campaigner can't knock on voters' doors?
You're the one suggesting that a reporter can't knock on a door.
I am, because she was told to stay away from me, specifically she. I don't go to someone's door if they tell me to stay away.
Group exhibits all right, Your Honor?
Yeah.
What's that?
Group exhibits all right?
Fine.
Chris, were you going to move? I don't know if you moved to admit these yet. I know you
Not
moved
yet,
to-
I will. I mean, I can, yeah, at this, while I'm putting this together, move to admit that which has already been marked as defense exhibits.
It's 1 through 4, I believe.
1 through 4.
Yeah, no objection, Judge.
Okay. I'll be admitted.
So we talk about group exhibit 5. Do you know an individual by the name of Nicole Garcia personally?
I don't recall that name.
So because you don't know Nicole Garcia personally, you wouldn't know what she might be capable of, correct?
Judge, I'm going to reject it, relevance again at this point. It's been established that Ms. Sanchez was investigating this issue relative to Senator Rogers' residence, and we don't need to rehash the issue, so it's not only irrelevant, but it's cumulative.
response?
I think we'll see that with respect to this particular line of inquiry, it's exactly not cumulative.
I'll overrule.
I'm sorry, did you answer my question?
I can't recall. Say again.
Because you don't know Miss Nicole Garcia personally, you wouldn't know what she's capable of, correct?
If I don't know someone, then I would not know what that person is capable of by definition.
Okay. Did you ever, because you don't know Miss Nicole Garcia personally, you never invited her to any of your residences, correct?
I guess.
So you didn't invite Nicole Garcia to your home in Tempe on April 21st, 2023?
I wasn't at that home. I was up here in Flagstaff, so I have no idea what you're asking me.
Well, I mean, did you invite anybody from Fox 10 News, either Nicole Garcia or anyone else from Fox 10 News, to visit any of your homes, either Flagstaff or Tempe or Chandler, on April 21st, 2023?
Yeah, Judge, I have to re-raise this objection again. Unless it can be established that this other journalist was given a specific directive to stay away from Senator Rogers, I don't see how this is relevant.
Now, the specific directive, as I heard it, was on the Senate floor. I think the first directive that prohibited contact, period, was the ex parte injunction against harassment, unless I heard it wrong.
No, that's exactly correct, Your Honor. And I don't exactly agree that which has been described about this prohibition in the Senate, but that's a separate issue. But certainly with respect to the hearing that took place on the 19th and the injunction, the only time residents ever came up was during the course of the petition that was filed and the injunction hearing, and that was the scope of the no location.
I think counsel's trying to bring up a point regarding uninvited guests, and I'll allow that.
Thank you. So on April 21st, you didn't invite anybody from Fox 10 News, either Nicole Garcia or anyone from Fox 10 News, to any of your three residences?
I did not.
All right. I'm going to hand you a group exhibit marked Defense Exhibit 5 and ask you to please take a look at that. Do you recognize the photos? They're on page 1, 2, and 3 of Group Exhibit 5.
They represent the homes that we own.
Okay. So we've got one of them is a photo of your Tempe home. And I believe the Tempe home actually depicts somebody walking towards the front door, correct?
It appears that way.
An uninvited person nonetheless, correct? We've established you didn't invite anybody that day, so you weren't there. An uninvited person.
Correct.
And then the other photos are of your Flagstaff home and of your Chandler home, correct?
Correct.
And did you then, I assume, because we have uninvited guests to your residences, that you then proceeded to file a petition for an injunction against harassment against individuals from Fox 10 News as well, correct?
Incorrect.
Those are all the questions I have, Your Honor. And I'm sorry, just the last week of the
Any objection to those last photos being admitted?
Well, the objection I've already lodged, Judge, but
Okay,
there's
I'll
no...
then.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So if you could, unless you wanted to hold on to those exhibits.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, Judge.
Okay, go ahead with redirect.
Thank you. 1 second here. Did you ever have an encounter with Nicole Garcia where you said, "You're dismissed"?
No.
Did the Sergeant of Arms of the Senate ever tell Nicole Garcia to leave you alone?
No.
Did Senate staffers ever tell Nicole Garcia to leave you alone?
No.
Before today, did you even know that Nicole Garcia had even gone to your house? Houses, I should say?
I had heard that a reporter went to all three houses, including this one up here.
Did you know who it was?
Maybe someone told me the name, but I didn't dwell on it.
So, but help us, how was it different relative to Nicole Garcia and Cameron Sanchez?
Nicole Garcia wasn't stalking me.
Objection.
Overruled.
Yeah, look at those exhibits briefly, Judge.
She has some.
Senator Rogers, I'd like you to, I believe my colleague started to read into the record portions of Exhibit 3, and just for the sake of context, I think it's important we get the full statement in there. So, you know, if you could, see where I'm pointing to where it says, I didn't have any further issues. Could you please read the remainder of that paragraph here on Exhibit 3 for the record?
I'll just start at the beginning. Earlier in this legislative session, after the reporter repeatedly invaded my personal space at my desk in the Senate chamber, I requested that the Senate Sergeant at Arms and staff convey to the reporter that I did not want her to approach me, said Senator Rogers. Quote, I didn't have any further issues with this reporter until this week, when she showed up at 2 of my Valley homes multiple times. The latest attempted contact at one of my residences happened Wednesday night. I don't know this reporter personally, I don't know what she's capable of, and I don't believe anyone in their right mind would show up uninvited to my home at night. Therefore, I don't trust that this person wouldn't lash out or try to physically harm me in some fashion, close quote.
Now, Ms. Rogers, we didn't discuss that incident as it wasn't in your petition, but seeing as how defense counsel has brought up this incident, but was there an incident on April 19th where Ms. Sanchez went back to the Chandler home at night?
Yes.
What happened then?
I was out with constituents in Flagstaff for the evening. I went back to our Flagstaff home. My husband texted me. He said, here is another Ring doorbell picture of said individual at night at our Chandler home. He was so alarmed that we talked then over the phone. This picture is time-stamped 1921, 7/21 on April 19th. And he called me and he said, my husband said, I will have to go back down to that home to make sure it's secure because I'm getting a really bad feeling about all of this.
And Senator Rogers, just to clarify, this incident on April 19th where Cameron Sanchez went back to the Chandler home in the evening, that occurred after you'd already gotten the ex parte injunction, correct?
That's correct, but it had not been served as I recall.
Judge, move to admit plaintiff's 5.
Any objection?
No objection.
Plaintiff's 5 will be admitted.
And Colonel Rogers, do you have in front of us, sorry, Senator Rogers. Old habits die hard. Senator Rogers, do you have in front of you the transcript from the ex parte hearing? I believe it's one of the defense exhibits.
Yes.
And ma'am, if we could direct your attention to page 5. And again, I just want to have you read out loud in the record some of what was said here. So if you have page 5 starting on line 13, I believe that's the judge talking and then you respond. Please let me know when you get there.
I'm here.
Okay, if you could start reading with the judge's comments starting page 5, line 13, and moving down into the first paragraph of your response.
I am more concerned about the fact that she is showing...
If you could back up just a little bit, I'm worried about over the record. Thanks.
You're going to blow out the court reporter's eardrums if you're not careful.
I am more concerned about the fact that she is showing up at your residences. I don't know that. Is that a standard practice for reporters to track senators at their residences? Do you know if that's normal? Judge, comma, to my knowledge, it is not normal, period. That is, at the point yesterday where my husband sent me those Ring doorbell images, he said, who is this? And I immediately recognized her. So I called the Senate attorneys and I asked them, and they said it was highly inappropriate.
And I'll just go ahead. I just wanted the first paragraph, but I appreciate that. So is it fair to say that you conveyed, at least to the judge during the hearing, that you felt that it was both inappropriate and non-customary for a reporter to show up at your personal homes like that?
Correct.
And then going again to, there's a discussion later in the transcript, I believe it's page 9, actually probably more so at the bottom of page 8, if I'm not mistaken. There was a colloquy with the judge as to whether or not to actually put the specific addresses of your Tempe home or your Chandler home on the actual injunction against harassment. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what request did you make of the judge relative to actually putting those specific addresses on there?
Well, I actually asked her to sort of coach me on what the protocol was and what the options I had were. And she said, and I'm just remembering this in my head, she said, if we put your addresses on there, then if you have a problem with this person revisiting you, it's easier for the police to track where it is occurring. And I said, well, there's a conflict there possibly for me because this puts my addresses, all 3 addresses, out in the public domain, even more so than they already are.
And so ultimately, because of that concern that you've expressed to the judge, did the actual specific addresses wind up going on the injunction itself?
No, because her advice to me was, given what you have told me, Senator, I would say you probably shouldn't put them out there.
Thank you, Senator. That's all the questions I have for you.
Brief question on it? Just brief?
And,
Just
well,
brief.
I'll let you redirect.
It's just very brief, Ron.
Otherwise, he'd wind up calling her during his case. So I'll allow you to further redirect.
Yes, Judge.
The exhibits, defense exhibit 1?
I think they're all the defense exhibits are
The petitions. This is the defense exhibit 1's the petition. I'm sorry. Defense exhibit 1's the petition that you filed with the Justice Court on April 19th, correct?
Yes.
All right. And so this is an affirmative document that you completed, you filled out, and you filed it with the court as part of the court record, correct?
Yes.
On page 2 of exhibit 1, you listed both of your addresses in a document that you filed with the court, correct?
I was compelled to, yes.
Compelled to? Who compelled you to fill this out? Who compelled you to put those addresses on there? You filled this out, which started the injunction procedure. You affirmatively put your home addresses on a document filed with the court on April 19, 2023.
I filled out a form which required, to my understanding, me to put those addresses on there.
Thank you.
Any redirect?
Nope.
No? Okay, you may step down. Any other evidence you'd like to present?
Yes, we'd like to call Cameron Sanchez.
Okay.
And raise your right hand. You swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
And have a seat.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sanchez. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you very much. I don't believe you and I have ever had the opportunity to speak before, unless I'm mistaken.
Not yet.
All right, well, it's good to finally meet you. Did you go home to your apartment Friday night?
This Friday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Were you aware that there was a process server at the apartment waiting for you?
No.
I'll strike that. If you could, please pick up Exhibit 4, or Defense Exhibit 4. I believe this is the text you sent to, I believe, is it King Quintero's?
Oh, where'd they go? Oh, there they are.
And just to be clear, you have Defense Exhibit 4 in front of you, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I won't read it directly, but you messaged Ms. Quintero indicating you had some questions relative to Wendy Rogers about potentially her living out of district. And Ms. Quintero's response was, I don't know anything about that. However, I do know she won't want to comment. Did I read that correctly, ma'am?
Yes.
And this colloquy occurred on April 17th, correct?
Yes.
Wait, who said, I know she won't want to comment?
Kim Quintero.
Yeah.
And if you could, please refresh the judge as to who that is.
She's the Senate Majority Communications Director.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
I just didn't know if it was Ms. Sanchez who said that or Kim Quintero.
And you responded to this response from Ms. Quintero saying, thank you, have to ask. Did I read that correctly, ma'am?
Yes.
All right. And so, again, that colloquy with Ms. Quintero occurred on April 17th, correct?
Yes.
And it was the following day that you went to Wendy Rogers' Tempe home and to her Chandler home as well, correct?
Yes.
All right. So you went to both of those residences knowing that Senator Rogers did not wish to comment on this allegation that she potentially lived out of district, correct?
No.
You did not know that?
No, I have no way of knowing if she wanted to comment or not. Kim just said she didn't reply.
Well, I believe Ms. Quintero said, however, I do know she won't want to comment. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, but that's Kim's opinion, isn't it?
Well, ma'am, I'm not here to answer your questions, I'm afraid. You're here to answer my questions. But my question is, Kim Quintero had conveyed to you that Senator Rogers did not wish to comment on that topic, correct?
She said she wants to.
So Kim Quintero told you she won't want to comment on this allegation that she lived out of district, correct?
Yes, she did.
All right. And knowing that, nevertheless, you went to Senator Rogers' Tempe home and then later to her Chandler home, correct?
Yes, I did.
In fact, you went to the Chandler home twice, correct?
Yes.
Who did you encounter at the Chandler home?
I'm not sure, but there was a person working in there.
What did you say to him?
I don't know exactly. I said hi. I asked if Senator Rogers or her husband were there, and he said no. And I asked if they'd come back, and he said yeah, and I said okay, and then I left.
Did you say anything else?
I don't think so. We didn't talk much. I didn't really interview him. I mean, I knew he wasn't them.
So your purpose in going to the Tempe home and the Chandler home was to interview Senator Rogers?
No, not exactly.
Well, you just said that you didn't want to speak to the electrician because he wasn't them. So wasn't your purpose then to interview Senator Rogers or at least her husband?
If they were there.
All right. So again, your purpose was to go there to interview Senator Rogers or her husband, correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
No, I didn't know if anyone would be there at all. It was not just to talk to them, although I would have asked them questions if I'd seen them.
Okay. So you're telling us that you...
And
go ahead.
I'd like her to finish that.
Oh, please, ma'am. If I didn't mean to interrupt you, please complete your answer.
Part of it was also to talk to neighbors and just see it.
Did you talk to neighbors?
Yeah.
So just to be clear, though, you went to both the Tempe home and the Chandler home intending to interview Senator Rogers after, one, a request had been made of you in the Senate to have no contact with her, correct?
Objection, that misstates the testimony.
Well, she can kind of clarify it, I think.
Okay.
She probably knows best. She and Senator Rogers.
So, can you ask me again?
All right, so you went to both the Tempe home and the Chandler home with the specific intent of interviewing Senator Rogers, despite having been told previously in February in the Senate that you should not have contact with Senator Rogers.
No,
You were not told not to have contact with Senator Rogers in February of this
I
year?
was not told that.
You were never... What were you told relative to Senator
I
Rogers?
was told that she didn't want me to approach her at her desk on the floor.
And so you thought that although you were told not to approach her at her desk on the floor, it was perfectly acceptable for you to approach her at her private residence in either Tempe or Chandler. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what Kim said. Well, sort of. Kim, can I say more?
Please.
So, on the 28th, Joe Kubaki, who's the Sergeant at Arms, told me that Senator Rogers had asked him to tell me to not talk to her at her desk anymore. And I told Gary, my editor, and Wayne and Colleen, my other editors. And Gary talked to Kim to ask what it was about. And Kim said she can talk to her anywhere but the desk. So hallway's fine, committee room's fine, outside the Senate is fine.
Did you ever approach Senator Rogers and say, I understand we shouldn't approach you at the desk, but may I have an interview with you in your office or at your home?
I don't know that we talked after February 28th.
So you just elected to show up at both the Tempe home and the Chandler home unannounced, is that correct?
Yes.
Senator Rogers never invited you to either residence, correct?
No.
Are you friendly with Senator Rogers outside the Senate?
No.
And although we touched on it briefly, you agree with me that there was another incident in January 2022 where similarly you were told to, I guess, not have contact with Senator Rogers on the Senate floor?
No.
Please tell me what happened then.
Okay, so it was January 19th, 2022. It was the start of last session, and I had been working at the Cap Branch for a couple months, but I hadn't talked to Senator Rogers before, so this was like our first interaction. And I went up to her and I said, "Hi, Senator Rogers, can I ask you about Senate Bill 1045 and Senate Bill 1046? And she didn't want to talk. She asked Joe something, Joe, the Sergeant at Arms, and I waited. And then she said something along the lines of like, "This is a private conversation, or this isn't for you." And then she left. And I asked Joe if everything was okay, and he said, "Yeah." And I wasn't directed by staff to not talk to her.
Did you ever talk to her again after that incident?
Yeah.
On the Senate floor?
Yes.
When?
I don't know all the times. I kind of talk to all of them every time we gavel out. Like, I go talk to senators every time. I didn't talk to her as much as probably most of the other senators because I didn't think that she would want to talk.
Could you tell me by name every other legislator in the state of Arizona whose house you have visited unannounced?
I haven't.
Now, my understanding is you've made several public records requests relative to Senator Rogers and her mileage and things like that, correct?
Yeah.
And this is pursuant to your investigation that she allegedly doesn't live in the district?
Yes.
Does the First Amendment give you permission to trespass on private property?
No.
Did you ever, like, Google, does the First Amendment allow journalists to trespass?
I have never Googled that.
And just so we're clear, did you think that you were welcome to either go to the Chandler home or the Tempe home at any point in time?
I didn't know that I was welcome or unwelcome. We've never talked about it.
But despite your previous interactions with Senator Rogers, it's your testimony that you had no idea as to whether or not she would have welcomed you to her private residence in Tempe or Chandler?
That wasn't really my goal. I didn't know if she would or wouldn't, but I didn't really have that goal in mind.
Your goal was to go there unannounced and ask questions of her, correct?
In part, if she was there, it would have been convenient.
Are you capable of asking Senator Rogers questions at places other than her private residence in Tempe or her private residence in
Yes.
Chandler? Yes?
Yes.
Have you attempted to do that?
Yes.
When?
I don't know all the times. I know I asked her a question once on January 24th because of text that I reviewed.
Anything else?
I've sent email requests.
Anything else?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Were any of those requests responded to?
Just once. January 24th, that's why I remember.
And what was the response?
She said, "I don't know."
All right. So none of those responses or lack of responses ever communicated to you that Senator Rogers would have welcomed you showing up at her homes in Tempe or Chandler. Is that correct?
Her behavior never indicated that.
Anything else with her? Anything else with her? That's all I have for now, Judge.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Hennessy?
Well, I mean, if you want me to do essentially do my direct examination of her now,
You
or you
can.
want me to wait until plaintiff closes?
You can, or either way.
We'll skip-
Your choice. However you want to handle is fine with me.
We'll wait. We'll reserve direct examination until the plaintiff closes.
Yeah, and Judge, we would move to call the witness remotely, Mr. Keith Carter.
And what's,
He was the electrician at the Chandler residence when Ms. Sanchez was there.
okay, and I understand he may be available by Zoom?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you have any comment about that, Mr. Hennessy?
I mean, it's beyond, well, yes, it's, first of all, beyond the scope of that which is alleged in the petition, but more importantly, and we would address this, I would address this in closing, Your Honor, the statute requires harassment of a person, which means
Not their electrician?
not their electrician. And the case law is pretty straightforward that harassment has to be of the individual that's complaining of the harassment, not of someone else there. And therefore, Mr. Carter, I believe they said his name was, whatever, the electrician's name, any testimony he would offer is irrelevant to the petition that was submitted.
I'll allow him to testify, but you can object to any of those questions. I assume, Mr. Fishbach, that you're going to question him about harassment of Senator Rogers?
Well, correct, Judge. And another element, well, I can keep it brief, Judge, put it that way. I don't need to rehash what we've already established in the testimony already.
Okay. I'll allow it. You can certainly object to relevance in any, object to any question.
Thank you.
How are we going to do this? I don't know how I just can't hear you.
Oh, okay. And Keith, what's his last name?
Carter.
Carter, okay. Can you turn on your video?
Let's see, where is that? There we go.
Okay. And go ahead, Mr. Fishbach.
All right. Has he been sworn in, Judge?
Oh, no. That's a good point. Raise your right hand, sir.
Hold on 1 second, it's by my right hand. Okay, there we go.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, you can put your hand down. Thanks for that.
Mr. Carter, sir, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you, sir. I'll be very brief, and I just want to establish.
Okay.
It's my understanding that you're an electrician, correct?
Yes.
And, sir, you were working at the Chandler home of Senator Wendy Rogers on April 18th when Ms. Sanchez came by?
Correct.
All right. Did you do anything suggesting to Ms. Sanchez that you were inviting her onto the property?
No.
All right. What did Ms. Sanchez say to you during your interaction with her? And tell us how that occurred.
Well, I'm going to object to foundation. I'm not sure it's been established that this individual knows Karen Sanchez.
Do you know Cameron Sanchez, Mr. Carter?
I would only recognize her as picture that I was shown that was at the front door that day. I did not know her name or who she was.
All right. I can, if I could lay some foundation, Judge.
Okay.
Mr. Carter, sir, when you were working at the Chandler home on the 18th of April, did somebody approach the home?
Yes.
All right. What did they say to you?
Asked if Wendy or Hal was around.
And what did you say in response?
I said no, they were not.
All right. What did she say? And was this individual male or female?
Female.
Could you describe her physically?
Dark hair, height-wise, maybe somewhere around 5'6", 5'7", not sure about that, but I was basically working in a room and I could see the front door. I didn't approach the door, I could just see it from the angle I was at.
All right. And did she identify herself?
She did not.
So after she inquired whether or not Senator Rogers or her husband were present, what happened after that?
He asked me when they might be back, and I said, Hal just left. He said he would be back after a while, and that we'll call Miss Rogers, would be back to there today at all.
All right. What happened after that?
She said, thank you, and she asked me, she said, is it safe? Kind of struck me kind of odd. Is it safe? But I said, yes, it's safe. And then she turned around and walked away.
At any point did this individual identify herself?
And no, she did not.
All right. And I believe you described her in terms of height, hair color. Can you give us an approximate age?
Oh, I would say maybe early 30s.
All right. And at any point, did you do anything to signal to this individual that she was welcome on the property?
I did not.
That's all the questions I have, sir.
Anything? Mr. Hensey?
No, I have no questions for this witness.
Okay.
My same objection stands, but no, I have no questions for the
Okay.
witness.
All right, we're all done with you, Mr. Carter.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Fishbach?
Yeah, Judge, I would like to have marked and admitted Senate Bill 1061, which was just signed by the governor, and it actually, I mean, isn't just...
I'm aware of it. It's regarding confidentiality of elected officials' addresses.
Correct, and I do think it's relevant in terms of public policy issues here that we're, and so I would like to have it marked and admitted and have the court take judicial notice of it.
I'll take judicial notice of it. Any problem with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a
law. So
I understand it's a law. It's a law that's not even in effect yet, Your Honor.
that's true. That's not.
So the relevance with respect to these proceedings, there's some sort of suggestion as though there's something untoward that occurred by virtue of a law that's not even in effect yet.
It is true that it's not in effect yet until September or so.
I agree with that, Judge, but
How's it relevant?
I think the fact that both the legislature and our governor, who is of the opposite political party, saw fit to put this law in place. And I think it goes to the fact that it is alarming, it is harassing, it is annoying when
I mean, he can argue those policies. I can't help but take judicial notice of the fact that such a law was passed.
Judge, claim for us.
So we've been going about an hour and a half. Why don't we take a 10-minute recess? I could go with 5-minute recess. We could vote. Why don't we reconvene at 3:05?
Thank you, Your Honor.
All rise. If anybody needs to use the restroom, you can go straight out, leave the court, and then it's right to your right there. Sir, can I slide that back now? Or I will, yeah, so, but yeah, thank you, I appreciate that. Like, I would have known they were.
record, and I understand from some people it's pretty hot in here. We usually don't generate this much body heat. This is unusual. Is defense ready to present its case?
Well, I am, Your Honor. I would like, for the record, I would like to make a request for a directive finding to revoke the protective order before presenting our case. I don't believe that the plaintiff has met their burden of proof under the statute. The statute, Section 1208, Section 12-1809, requires a series of acts that would cause a reasonable person to be alarmed, that in fact alarmed, harass the person, and serves no legitimate purpose, and they have to meet all 4 elements. And I don't believe they've met their burden of proof as to all 4 elements. The events that took place at the residence can't qualify as part of a series of events because the senator wasn't there. And the harassment, the case law discusses that harassment has to be of a person, and she wasn't present. And I can give you the case citations if you'd like. If you want me to.
I'm inclined to deny the directed verdict.
Okay.
And let you present your case.
Okay, that's fine, Your Honor. I understand. I just want to make it for the record. I just want to make the argument for the record. Okay. Then we will call Ms. Sanchez.
Okay, and you remain under oath. Are there still exhibits around? Can I have those, please? Thanks. And if you need the witness to have them, that'll be fine.
Good afternoon, Cameron. How are you doing?
Very high.
I know you had a chance to talk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more, okay? What is your job title?
I'm State Senate reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times.
And for how long have you held that position?
About a year and a half.
So in the title State Senate reporter, do I take that to mean your role is essentially reporting on the events of the state Senate?
Yeah, I'm the only State Senate reporter in Arizona.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?
I mean, I'm the only reporter whose sole job it is to cover the Senate.
Within the entire state of all the various newspapers and publications in the state of Arizona, you're the only one whose sole job is to report on the Senate?
Yes.
And just briefly, what does that mean to be a state Senate reporter? Just tell us a little bit, help the judge understand, the court understand what that means for your role.
So I write articles for the Arizona Capitol Times, which is a paper that comes out in print weekly. We also update web stories. And we have other publications, including the Legislative Report and the Yellow Sheet Report. The Yellow Sheet Report comes out Monday through Friday every day, and the Ledger Report comes out Monday through Friday every day of the session. So we've got 4 reporters, a House reporter and a Senate reporter, me. We write for the Ledger Report every day of session, and then we write for the Yellow Sheet in the interim.
Does your job require you to be at the Senate on a regular basis?
Yes, every day that they're there, I'm there.
Okay. Were you able to just start showing up at the Senate to do your job, or was there some sort of process you had to go through in order to be allowed to be at the Senate for doing work?
Anyone can be at the Senate, but the media get to go into special areas, and for that you need to have credentials. So there's a credentials application that you fill out as a reporter.
And when did you first fill out the application for credentials?
I think it was December of 2021.
And that's when you first started reporting to the Senate?
Yeah. Well, I started technically on November 8th when I got hired.
But in terms of being able to access the press areas of the Senate, it was only after you had your credentials?
Yes.
And have you maintained your credentials as a reporter at the State Senate continuously since the time you first got it, even if it had to be renewed?
Yes, and yes, it had to be renewed.
And you maintain those credentials now?
Yes.
are you aware of, or are there rules associated with members of the press who are present at the Senate about places they can and can't go, things they can and can't do?
Yes,
And are you familiar with those rules?
yes.
So I'm going to hand you documents that have been marked as Defense Exhibit 8 and 9 and ask you to please take a look at those documents. Are you familiar with those documents? Do you recognize those documents?
Yes, they're the media rules and decorum.
Okay. And these are the rules that explain the differences between these two things and how they relate to you doing your job at Senate.
So the rules, as I understand it, are like more strict, and it's rules for how the media is supposed to behave. And then the decorum is, I think, a little bit more guideline-y. It's like you should dress nicely. And these are both part of what we see when we fill out an application for credentials at the Senate.
And I want to turn your attention, and I'm sorry, I wasn't tracking the exhibit numbers, the media rules, whichever exhibit that is.
8.
Exhibit 8. Media rules. Number 2, media wanting access to the press area shall make application in accordance with the rules at the Senate. See that?
Yes.
And that's the process that you went through to be able to have access to the press areas.
Yes.
And then continuing on, rule number 3, the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms and Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms shall limit membership in the press areas to bona fide correspondents of repute in their profession under such rules as the Senate shall prescribe. You see that?
Yes.
And so you've maintained that membership to the press areas as a bona fide correspondent of repute throughout your entire time working at the Senate.
Yes.
During your time reporting at the Senate, since you first started, have you come to know a senator by the name of Wendy Rogers?
Yes.
And when did you first have an interaction, the best you can recall, with Senator Rogers?
January 19th, 2022.
Is that the incident or the interaction that was discussed earlier on examination by plaintiff's counsel?
Yes.
All right. And for the purposes of the court and the judge, have you fully and accurately described what you believe to be the instance that occurred in January of 2022?
Yes.
All right. After your exchange with Senator Rogers in January 2022, did any member of did either the Sergeant-at-Arms or the Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms approach you and tell you that you violated one of the media rules associated with your time in the Senate?
No, I approached Joe and asked him if I was good. He said, yeah.
Joe, he's the Sergeant-at-Arms?
Yes.
Okay. And so the Sergeant-at-Arms told you after that interaction you were still fine?
Yes.
All right. So as far as you could tell, the Sergeant-at-Arms didn't believe you had violated any rules in your time in the Senate?
As far as I can tell.
Okay. After that time, and in the days thereafter, later that day or days thereafter, did anybody come to you and say, we believe that that exchange that took place was in violation of either the media rules or the media decorum?
No.
Okay. And the media decorum, Exhibit 9, I think you described that as kind of the manner in which you conduct yourself.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got decorum as the manner of conduct, and rules are more about access, where you're allowed to go and not allowed to go. Fair enough?
I guess that would depend on who you ask. I see it that way.
Okay. Well, I'm asking you, so.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I would say so.
So at no point in time did anybody come to you after that exchange that took place in January 2022 and tell you that you violated any aspect of the media decorum for the State Senate?
One time I had a cup of coffee at the press desk and Joe told me I had to drink it, so I did. Otherwise, no.
Well, I mean, what I mean is with respect to the exchange that took place with Senator Rogers in January 2022, nobody came to you and said the manner in which you conducted yourself as a well-credentialed journalist on the Senate, at the Senate, was in violation of one or more of the media decorum portions of as listed in Exhibit 9.
They did not.
Okay. what was the question that you asked Senator Rogers in January 2022? What was the purpose of the question that you asked?
I asked her if we could talk about Senate Bill 1045 and Senate Bill 1046, and that had come up, I think, in a pitch meeting. One of us was interested in writing about it. It might have been my editor. Don't know off the top of my head. But it was two bills that she sponsored, which is why I asked her.
Okay. Was there anything that you considered to be offensive about asking a senator about a Senate bill that they had sponsored?
No.
Was there anything about your tone of voice that suggested to you that you were being disrespectful in the manner in which you asked Senator Rogers to discuss a bill that she sponsored?
No.
Something that was touched on earlier during other testimony, actually before I do that, anything else that you feel that you want the court to understand with respect to that interaction that took place in January 2022?
No.
Okay. I want to talk about what you know regarding the per diem process or procedure for elected officials in the state of Arizona. Okay?
Okay, so it's not just the Senate. All the lawmakers can get a per diem, and it's to help them, especially if they're from far away, because they have to be at the Capitol during the session. So they fill out a report, their office, and then that goes to, I want to say payroll, it might be HR, and it's basically submitting for per diem.
Okay, in that report, that's that
Subsistence and mileage.
subsistence and mileage report. Mm-hmm. And that subsistence and mileage report is a report that would be completed by the elected officials at their office, and they would sign it and they would submit it, and that would be their request for per diem under the applicable Arizona statute.
Right.
Okay. At some point in time, during your time in the reporting at the Senate, did you begin investigating a story regarding per diem contribution or per diem requests made by and amounts recovered by or received by elected officials?
I did. It wasn't for an article in the Cash Times, it was for a Ledge Report item.
Okay, explain what that means.
Ledge Report is our daily newsletter about the legislation, and so they're shorter items, a couple hundred words, so it was one of those smaller pieces.
Okay, and what did you do in furtherance of that investigation, story, whatever you want to call it?
For the Ledge Report item, I had made a public records request to the House and to the Senate for all the lawmakers' per diem payments from the beginning of this session, the one that we're in now, and I got those responses back. So I wrote a little item on it, and then I published it.
Okay, and I want to focus just on those with respect to the Senate. You received a report, if I understand correctly, you received a report that had names of Arizona state senators, and it had amounts of per diem that they had received during the course of this most recent legislative session.
Yes, all of them.
Okay. And was there anything that was notable to you with respect to any of the numbers or anything associated with that report that you saw?
There were a lot of them who had the same amount in a low amount, and then there were a lot of them who were making the same amount in a higher amount.
Okay. And what was the higher amount?
A little over 19,000.
Okay. And was Senator Rogers' name on that list at all?
Yes.
And was her name on the part with the higher amount or the part of the lower amount?
Higher.
For any of the senators that were on that report, on the ones with the higher amount, had you heard anything in your time at the Senate or doing your work at the Senate regarding questions associated with residency of the various senators that were on that higher amount on that report?
Couple.
Okay. Was Wendy Rogers one of them?
Yes.
Okay. And so what did you do, if anything, in furtherance of your story with respect to the per diem, noting that Wendy Rogers' name was in that higher portion and you had heard whatever it is that you had heard with respect to her residency?
At that point, nothing.
Okay.
It was April 14th. My editor, Gary Grotto, asked me why she was getting a per diem. And I said it's because she represents Flagstaff. She's a senator. And he asked me if I had heard that she doesn't live there. And I said I'd heard a rumor, but I'd never heard anything substantial about it. And I had never written anything on it. He asked me to look into it. And I said okay, but I didn't because I didn't have anything. Should I keep going?
Sure. Please.
So then Gary sent me an email with the deed that she had recently signed, purchasing a home in Chandler, which said, I currently reside in Tempe. And he asked me, again, to look into it, and so I started to. I started to document, I started, putting together information, the per diem, the residences, asked things that I'd heard. And then it was on the 17th when I reached out to Kim.
Actually, before we get to Kim, I want to understand, and I want to make sure that the court understands, the importance as it relates to the per diem of these reports that are submitted for a senator that lives in Tempe, which is in the same county as the state capital, correct?
Yeah, Maricopa County.
Versus a senator that might live in a different part of the state. Of what relevance is that? Why does that matter?
You don't need this high up per diem if you already live in Maricopa County and represent Maricopa County, because you don't have to rent a hotel or travel long distances for work. But then if you're living further away, the idea is that you can get reimbursed for longer mileage, and if you have to pay for a hotel or something, you can do that more easily.
Okay. And so as you understand it, the per diem is to cover the travel expenses for senators, or actually any, I get it, I'm talking about senators specifically, but I get it, the statute applies to any legislator. If they can travel from their place where they reside, that they represent, to the state capital, and it's supposed to offset those costs. Okay. And so then, given that, what was the significance of seeing the deed or the documents that you saw where it was indicated that Senator Rogers stated that she resided in Tempe?
Well, it was something I wanted to look into and that Gary wanted to look into, because there have been a lot of residency questions in the past. But it's a complicated thing, and normally we just hear rumors. And here, there was something that said that she actually resides in Tempe. And so he and I agreed that that was interesting, and we wanted to know more.
Okay. And did that information that you saw have an address in Tempe?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. At some point in time, well, before we get to your discussion on April 17th, your communications on April 17th with Kim, at some point, did you see information associated with residents in Chandler?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you please explain that to the court?
So the deed that she signed purchasing the home in Chandler, I saw that, and then when I did some research, I saw a little more information on the house, just like the estimated value, floor plan, that kind of thing.
Okay, and so was there any other investigation, any other work that you did associated with either documents provided to you or things that you looked into affirmatively regarding either Tempe or Chandler?
I made some more public records requests.
Okay, and what were those?
I made a request, I believe, for all of the per diem that Senator Rogers received, not just from the start of this most recent session, and also for an actual mileage report, so I could see that, because I haven't requested that before.
Okay. What is that? What the mileage report? That's a report that's submitted to indicate that the mileage was in fact traveled from point A to point B.
I believe they're bi-weekly, yes. Okay.
But nonetheless, it's a submission to state, I travel from here to here, however many days that encompass the period.
Yes.
Okay. So then what steps, if any, did you take next with respect to this investigation regarding the per diem and residence issue?
I asked him on the 17th to pass along a request for comment to Rogers. That's the text message we talked about earlier.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second. I believe you have the defense exhibits there?
I do.
Okay.
And I have that one, which is 4.
All right. Thank you, Ron. I'm going to hand you a document marked defense exhibit 4. I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, or you heard about testimony about this earlier. Defense exhibit 4, is that your text exchange that you had with Kim Quintero at the Senate?
Yes.
Okay. And so the first portion of the text at 143 has already been read into the record. What was your intent in reaching out to Kim with what you could put contained in the text that you sent her at 143 on April 17th?
I wanted to ask Senator Rogers a question. As has been stated earlier, we were on a break, so I couldn't ask her on the floor. Plus, there had been that whole thing. Anyway, but I needed to ask. It was part of my due diligence to request a comment. So that's what I was doing.
And so your first approach was reach out to Kim, and then Kim responded to you.
Yes, she did.
And what did you understand Kim's response to mean where she said, because I believe when you were being questioned earlier, in fact, let's take a step back. When you were being questioned earlier by counsel for plaintiff, I believe only a portion of Kim's text was read in. So why don't we put the whole text into the record? And that is, Kim responded to you, I don't know anything about that. However, I do know she won't want to comment, period. Nonetheless, I will screenshot your text and send it to her. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you understand that to mean with respect to what Kim was going to do regarding your question and Senator Rogers?
That Kim was going to take a screenshot of the text I had just sent and send it to Senator Rogers.
So, in other words, even if perhaps Senator Rogers might not want to comment to you directly, that if Kim passed it along, Kim could get an answer for you and pass it along to you.
Right.
Okay. And then moving on, a little while later at 2:49, you sent Kim a message again. Shoot me a text if and when she says no, so I can add, not sure if this will be published today, but maybe. What did you mean by what you put in that message to Kim?
I was following up to poke Kim a little bit and let her know I was still waiting. And also to tell her that, give her an idea of the timeline.
Okay. And then Kim responded to you at 3:56 p.m., and there was no reply. And what did you understand that to mean?
I understood it to mean that she had sent the message to Senator Rogers, but Senator Rogers hadn't replied to it.
Okay. On April 17th.
Here, let me have that back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, no, she has that one.
Oh, she has?
She has
Oh,
that.
I thought you had it.
No, I gave it to her. She has the court exhibit.
She has the court exhibit.
Yes.
Okay, good.
On April 17, 2023, did you take any other steps to reach out to Senator Rogers or any member of her staff seeking comment associated with your questions regarding residency and per diem?
Yes, I emailed Senator Rogers and I CC'd her assistant and asked for a subsistence and mileage report. I had already requested that from Pete Galvin, who's the Senate attorney who responds to those requests. But I talked to the assistant on the phone and I thought that maybe it would be easier that way. Senator Rogers didn't respond, but her assistant and I talked briefly.
Okay, and what was that communication?
Well, I let her know that I had asked Pete, and she said, okay, cool, we'll let, I mean, she didn't say that verbatim, but she said, we'll let Pete handle it. And
Okay.
Pete responded.
And was that on the same day?
Pete didn't respond until later, I don't think. But the 17th is when I emailed, yes.
Okay, all right. All right, I want to go back in time briefly before we pick up on April 18th. And I want to talk about February 2023. All right. Defense Exhibit 1. You have that one? It's the witness and not take it. Defense Exhibit 1. Pretending you a document marked Defense Exhibit 1. Ask you to please take a look. And while you're reviewing that, if we could move, I don't think I moved 8 and 9 into evidence.
I don't even remember what they
8 and 9 were the rules and the meter rules and the meter requirement.
Any objection to
Can I
those?
see those again real quick? I didn't realize there were two documents. I see that one. Is there a second one?
There should be 2 there. No?
Yeah, I only got one.
Oh, correct. Which one do you have there?
Unless, is it,
No, I might have just, here, which one do you have? Rules, here's decorum.
okay,
There.
decorum,
Mhm.
thank you. Can I keep this copy?
Sure.
We can make a copy.
Yeah, I have no objection, Judge. They are what they
8,
are.
9 will be admitted, defense 8, 9.
So you've had a chance to look at defense 1?
Yes.
All right, I want to turn your page to turn your attention to the top of the second page. And there's an incident described February 27, 2023. On the floor of the Arizona Senate, Ms. Sanchez persisted with questioning me even when rebuffed. 3 Arizona staff members witnessed this. Finally, I had to tell her she was dismissed. She was verbally forbidden by Senate staff from approaching me after the incident. This was a violation in and of itself of having been told in 2022 not to approach her. Do you see that? All right. Well, first and foremost, I'm going to go in reverse order. Were you told in 2022 not to approach her?
No.
Now I want to go to the first sentence. On the floor of the Senate, Ms. Sanchez persisted with questioning me even when rebuffed. You see that? All right. Now, do you believe that to be an accurate statement?
She sort of ignored me at the beginning.
Okay.
I don't know if that counts as rebuff.
Okay. Why don't you describe for the court what exactly occurred, the exchange that occurred on October 27, 2023?
I went up to her desk after the gavel, and I asked to talk, and she didn't really respond. And then I said, hi, Senator Rogers. Have you ever taken a bribe from the Sinaloa Mexican drug cartel?
Okay. Well, let's pause right there. That sounds really bad. Why don't you explain to the court why you asked that question?
It's sort of a long story.
Long away.
So I think it was February 23rd. There was a joint elections meeting of the House and Senate. This was an elections committee with just Republicans because I don't think the Democrats came to it. And I didn't cover that, but I believe our House reporter did. When there's a joint thing like that, we split it up. And at this elections committee meeting, there were some guests, I believe, invited by former Representative Liz Harris. And one of them was a woman who said that Governor Hobbs and other politicians were taking bribes from the Sinaloa Mexican drug cartel. And that became a news story. It was a big accusation. There was an Arizona Republic reporter called Ray Stern who, on the 27th, I believe, published a story. He said that the woman, Brieger, had gotten the information from her boyfriend. This information about the alleged bribes from her boyfriend. And he talked to the boyfriend. I don't know the boyfriend's name. But the boyfriend said that there were a lot of people taking these bribes, including Senator Rogers and Senator Ken Bennett. So Ray Stern had come to the Senate floor. He's also a credentialed member of the media who covers politics. And he and I were at the desk, and we were talking about the whole elections thing. And he said he wanted to talk to Rogers and Bennett. And I said, okay. And then he had to leave. He had something to do. He had somewhere to be. And I said, I'll ask him. And I was interested, too. Before that, it hadn't really involved me because I hadn't been at the elections meeting, but those are two senators and I cover the Senate. So after gavel up, I went to Senator Rogers' desk, and that's why that question.
Okay. So you also mentioned Senator Bennett. Was Senator Bennett in the vicinity there?
He was.
Okay. So 2 individuals whose names were brought up in a report that you had nothing to do with some allegation that is outlandish as it is, was not your allegation, happened to be there, Rogers and Bennett, and somebody else said this impacted these people, and so you saw fit to go ask the senators if they had any comment with respect to this story, basically.
Yes, I wanted to give them the opportunity to comment.
Okay, great. And so you asked Senator Rogers, and what did Senator Rogers say?
Well, initially nothing, and then she said, you're dismissed, and she left. And then I turned to Senator Bennett, and I asked him the same thing, and he kind of chuckled, and he said, no, I haven't taken bribes. And then we talked for a bit, and he gave me some comments, and I said, okay, and then I went about my day.
So if I understand you correctly, the same exact question you asked Senator Rogers that she walked away from, you asked Senator Bennett, and he stood there and answered it.
It might not have been verbatim, but yeah,
okay.
Same question.
Both involving, if not verbatim, both involving this notion that somebody else had brought up with respect to bribes. Okay. After that exchange took place, I'm going to go back to Exhibit 1 in that portion at the top of February 27, 2023. Were you verbally forbidden by Senate staff from approaching Senator Rogers after February 27, 2023?
So on February 28th, which was the next day, Joe, the Sergeant at Arms, came to me, and that's when he said that Senator Rogers didn't want me to talk to her at her desk. And I asked him what would happen if I did, and he said, just don't do it. And I said, no, really? And he said, no. And I said, no, really, Joe? And then he said, well, you have your credentials now, but you might not get to keep them. And so that's when I texted Gary, Lynn, and Colleen, my other editors, and I said, hey, this just happened. And Gary talked to Kim. And that's when Kim said, no, not at the desk, but anywhere else is fine.
Okay. So coming off the heels of February now 28, 2023, from Kim Quintero, who's the communications director for the House Majority.
Senate Majority.
Senate Majority. Your direction from Kim was, don't approach Senator Rogers at her desk, but you could talk to her anywhere else.
She didn't tell me not to. She said that if I did, yes.
Okay. So from that point forward, from February 28, 2023, up through the present time, have you had any interactions with Senator Rogers?
Not until now.
Anything else that you think the court should know or understand with respect to either the events that took place on February 27, 2023, or the characterization of those events as they exist in the petition or as described by Senator Rogers?
I think that's it.
Okay. Now let's jump ahead to April 18 of this year, okay? We know you've had the exchange with Kim Quintero. We know you sent the emails.
One email.
One email.
To Rogers, CCing her assistant.
What was the communication to the other individual?
To Pete?
Yes.
I talked to Pete too. Yes, that's true.
Was it, what form of communication?
I think I emailed Pete as well. I
Okay.
usually email my public records requests.
Okay.
More formal.
So you've taken several steps as part of your furtherance of your investigation into this issue by reaching out to Kim Quintero and hopefully to Senator Rogers through Kim Quintero, by reaching out to Senator Rogers and by reaching out to Pete.
Yes.
Pete is her assistant.
No, Pete is he works in the Senate Rules Office and he responds to all the public records requests.
Okay.
So you've taken several steps there to find out, to gain more information if you could, and potentially comment associated with the issue of the residences and the per diem requests and the mileage reimbursements and the report that we already talked about.
Yes.
Okay. And had you received any substantive responses to anything of those?
Not yet.
Okay. What steps, if any, did you take next with respect to this investigation?
Well, on the 18th is when Gary and I talked and he said that I had the directive, I guess, or the all clear to go to Tempe and Chandler.
Okay. And that was, so that's the residences, the addresses that you had on documents that Gary had provided to you, or, well, the Tempe address was on the one he provided to you. The Chandler address, where did that one come from?
All of that is available through the SOS website. I think I just checked it there.
Okay. All right. So April 18, you have a discussion with your editor, your executive editor, and he indicates that as part of this ongoing investigation, what you're trying to figure out here is to go to these addresses.
Yes.
Okay. What were you expecting to find? We'll break them down individually, Tempe and then Chandler. What were you expecting to find when you went to this Tempe address?
I didn't know what I was expecting to find. I didn't know if anyone would be there. I didn't know which one she was living in at the moment. But I wanted to go and I wanted to ask the neighbors or whoever about this issue and check it out.
And the week of, because it was the week of April 17th, and I believe you said there was a break going on at the time?
Yeah, we've had a few breaks.
Okay. Well, I want to focus just on that week, the week of April 17th, and specifically April 18th of that week. The Senate was on break.
Yes.
Okay. So with the Senate on break, and Senator Rogers being the senator from Flagstaff, did you actually have any reasonable expectation that Senator Rogers would be in her Tempe home since they were on break and she actually is the senator from Flagstaff?
I don't know, because during the break sometimes they still come into the office or the Capitol for various things, so
Okay.
it was possible.
So you weren't sure what was going to happen?
Right.
Okay. So what happened when you arrived?
In Tempe, I parked, I went up to the door, I rang the bell, there's no answer. I left, I knocked on some neighbors' doors, I talked to a neighbor. The neighbor wanted to be anonymous and I granted that.
Okay.
And the neighbor said that Senator Rogers lives in Tempe, that she lived there for 10 years, that it was her full-time residence, that she had business there, that the family was always there, that it wasn't part-time. But again, wanted to be anonymous. I said, okay. The neighbor also told me that Senator Rogers had purchased a home in Chandler and was moving there. I already knew that she purchased a home, but I said, thanks. And then I talked to Gary, and he said,
Hold on, I want to stop for a second. I want to go back to the actual physical structure that you saw in Tempe.
okay.
Was there a gate surrounding the exterior of the home?
No, but there's like a low, maybe adobe kind of
I think
thing.
we've got photographs. The photographs, the exhibits, the group
No.
exhibits. Your Honor. Yeah, those three photographs. Thank you. So I'm going to hand you, actually there's a third one too, I'm sorry. Yes, they're in a series. Thank you, Ron. So I'm going to hand you, let's give them together, 5, 6, and 7, defense 5, 6, and 7, see if you recognize those.
Yes.
Okay, so this Adobe thing that you were just describing, is that depicted in Exhibit 5?
Yes.
Okay, so was there a door or a gate or something preventing you to get to knock at the front door?
Not before the front door. The front door was closed.
Not my question. Was there any kind of a gate around the yard of the home?
No.
Okay. This Adobe structure, this Adobe portion that frames the front door area, was there a gate closing that off that you would have had to open?
No, there's a space in between them.
Okay. Was there any kind of thing that you had to climb over to get around to get over to the front door?
No.
You could just pull up in front and you walk up to the front door.
Right.
Okay. You said no one was home. Did you ever enter the residence in Tempe?
No.
Okay. So all of your interactions with the home in Tempe were on the exterior of the home?
Yes.
Okay.
It was pretty brief.
Okay. And I think you've covered anything else with respect to discussions with the neighbors?
In Tempe, no.
Okay. And then I think you said you were about to talk about talking to Gary next.
Right. I checked in with Gary.
All right. And then what was tell the court what occurred in that exchange?
I called him from the car. I said that I had been to the house, that there wasn't anyone there, that I was going to head over to Chandler. He said okay.
All right. And so with the group exhibit 5, 6, and 7, do you see the exterior of the home that's depicted for the Chandler residence?
Yes.
Okay. Which exhibit is that?
That one.
All right. And what happened when you arrived at that residence?
I pulled up to the house. Same thing. There was like a car on the front lawn, and the door was open, and from the porch I could see the electrician who I believe testified earlier. And so we had that exchange where I asked if anyone was there, which Senator Rogers and her husband specifically were there. And he said they weren't. And I asked if they'd be coming back, and he said yeah. I said, is it safe, because there was like a banging sound, and I thought maybe something had fallen. He said he was okay. And then I left the front porch, and I went back to the street, and then I knocked on some neighbors' doors, but no one answered. And then I talked to Gary again, and then I went back to the office. And then I did some more work on some other things. And then I called neighbors in Flagstaff that afternoon.
All right. Before we get to that part, what would the purpose of your going to the home in Tempe was to see whether there were signs or any indicia that Senator Rogers lived in Tempe full-time? Is that fair?
Partly, yes.
Okay. And when there was nobody home, you talked to neighbors to see what information they may be able to provide to you regarding whether Senator Rogers resided in Tempe full-time.
Just one.
Okay. Was your purpose of going to the Chandler home to determine whether Senator Rogers lived at the Chandler residence full-time as opposed to perhaps the Tempe residence or the Flagstaff residence?
Yes, same purpose.
All right, got it. All right, so then you said you were calling neighbors in Flagstaff.
I did.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you learn from those discussions?
I spoke to some neighbors in Flagstaff who said they had heard rumors about this, but that they didn't know much about the situation, or that they lived too far away to say for sure anything about it. There were others who didn't want to speak on the record.
Okay. Did you ever go to Flagstaff?
I've been to Flagstaff, but not her residence in Flagstaff.
Okay. I don't think I asked you this with respect to the Chandler home. Was there a gate around the yard of the Chandler home?
No.
Was there any kind of a gate or door or anything you had to move or open to get to the entrance of the residence?
No.
Did you ever go inside the house there?
No.
I did not mark it, no.
All right. Go to 10 now? document marked as Defendant's Exhibit 10. As we look at that document, do you recognize that document?
Yes.
Okay. I want to focus on the photographs that appear on Exhibit 10. Do you recognize yourself in these photographs?
Yes, 3 of them.
Okay. The photograph in the upper right-hand corner, I think we've seen a different version of that as a different marked exhibit. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. That's the time that you went to the Chandler house later.
On the 19th.
Okay. Was it light outside?
So twilighty.
Okay. What was the purpose of you going at that point in time?
It was Gary's idea. He thought that maybe people would be more likely to be home after work, like if they worked a 9 to 5.
Okay. The times that you visited, the time you went earlier, was it during the workday?
Yes, I think I was in Tempe around 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Chandler around 11:15.
Okay. And so you decided to go to the Chandler residence to see a little bit later?
Right.
Okay. The lower right-hand corner, Exhibit 10, that's a photo of you outside of Chandler the first time you went?
Yes.
And that's the truck that you mentioned was parked outside, like a work truck?
Yes.
All right. And what's that dangle, that you're dangling from your belt or something like that?
Credentials.
So you're wearing your press credentials and you're going to do this as part of your investigation?
Yes.
After that last visit, after these visits that you've already described, did you take any further steps with respect to your investigation into these issues associated with residency and the per diem?
After visiting on the 19th, no, because I got the injunction on the morning of the 20th.
Okay.
And then I stopped.
Did you ever hear any other response from Kim Quintero to that text message exchange from the 17th?
No,
Did you ever get a response to the email that you sent to the Senator on April 17th?
not from the senator, no.
Right, you've already testified as the other one. Okay. In your obtaining information, either any of the requests that you made, anything that you did associated with your investigation into this residency issue, did you fill out any documents where you were, fill out any documents under false pretenses that you lied, where you put some information in to try and lie to get the information back?
No, Judge, I'm going to I've been very lenient here in terms of the leading questions of his own witness here, and I have to object at this point. I mean, that was a wind-up beyond belief.
It was a yes or no, and she did say no. So I don't think, usually leading somebody is leading them into a yes.
That's my objection, Judge.
Okay, overruled.
And
Interesting.
we know that you never entered any of the residences, correct?
Correct.
And so you didn't gain entrance to any of the residences by lying to somebody or subterfuge or anything along those lines?
I did not.
Everything that you did with respect to communicating with Senator Rogers at the Senate, was that in your role as the State Senate reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Did you have any interactions with Senator Rogers at the State Senate that wasn't in your role as the reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times?
No.
Did you take any steps with respect to any aspect of your investigation into the per diem issue and the reporting and the address information that was not in your role as the Senate reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times?
No.
And did you take any steps in furtherance of your investigation where you went and visited the places after discussing it with your executive editor that were not in furtherance of your role as the State Senate reporter for the Arizona Capital Times?
No.
Those are all the questions I have.
Cross-examination.
Yeah, good idea.
Sanchez, we meet again. Good afternoon.
Before we get started, let's do a give us some water.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Do you, ma'am, do you need to break it all, or?
I'm good.
Okay. I believe you testified you're a Senate reporter, correct?
Yes.
And you've got credentials for that, correct?
Yes.
And those credentials can be revoked, is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, as we've established, there are certain ground rules that the Senate sets relative to your interaction with members of the Senate, correct? So just by virtue of having press credentials, it's just not an absolute a free-for-all as to how you conduct yourself as a journalist, is it?
Yes.
It is a free-for-all?
I'm agreeing that it is not free.
Oh, okay, thank you. Do you have in front of you I want to get, there's the decorum and then there's the rules, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you point to me in either one of those documents where it says that you can show up at the private residence of a senator to ask them questions?
I don't believe it talks about that in either document.
Okay. But it does give specific ground rules as to where you can conduct interviews, correct?
It talks about where and when in the Senate we
Okay.
can talk to lawmakers.
Right. So yeah, it gives you basic ground rules as to where and when you can interview senators, correct?
in the
Objection. Misstates the testimony.
Well, she covered it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so is it your testimony then that because that it doesn't prohibit you going to Senator Rogers' private residence, you can therefore do it?
Yes.
If you wanted to, for example, interview Senator Rogers here in the ladies' room during the break, you think that would be appropriate?
I probably wouldn't.
But are you saying that's perfectly okay to do?
Well, no, because I have an injunction.
Hypothetically, if there wasn't an injunction. Good point.
I still probably wouldn't. No, I have no reason to do it in that format.
Right. So there's reasons and there's certain reasonable limitations in the quorum as to where and when you're going to conduct interviews outside of the Senate, correct?
Yes.
Now, I think we agree that you were, at least as of February of this year, directed to have no conflict with Senator Rogers on the Senate floor. Is that correct?
I was told that if I did, there might be consequences.
The consequences being you might lose your press credentials, correct?
That's what was implied to me, yes.
All right. But you didn't perceive that as a directive to stay away from Senator Rogers on the Senate floor?
At her desk.
Excuse me, can you repeat that?
At her desk. Wait.
But you interpreted that remark to mean that feel free to go up to her house and interview her there?
At the time, that didn't occur to me. But Kim clarified that it doesn't apply to other areas.
Okay, so because Kim Quintero said it doesn't apply to other areas, that means that you could interview her any place else in the world other than her Senate desk?
Yes.
That's what you interpreted that remark to me?
Yes.
Despite the fact that Kim also advised you that she would have no comment relative to your inquiries relative to her residence in Tempe and Chandler?
Yes.
Now, just to be clear, nothing in this injunction against harassment prohibits you from publishing stories relative to Senator Rogers, correct?
I'm not sure. I haven't tried.
Well, can you point to me anything in the injunction that says you can't publish a story about Senator Rogers?
I have the petition with me. I don't.
Petition's not court order.
I understand. But are you aware of anything in the injunction against harassment itself that restricts you in any way from reporting on Senator Rogers?
I'm not directly aware of that, just say not to contact.
Going back to the text exchange you had with Kim Quintero on April 14th, which I believe was defense exhibit 4. Again, you reached out to Kim Quintero, who again, what is her role?
She's the Majority Communications Director for the Senate.
Okay. And so you write to the Majority Communications Director for the Senate, majority meaning the majority party,
Yes.
meaning Senator Rogers' party, the Republican Party. So you reach out to the Communications Director for the Senate majority, which includes Senator Rogers, and you advise her that you have some questions to ask her relative to her potentially not living in the district, correct? And the response you get from Kim Quintero is, I don't know anything about that, however, I do know she won't want to comment. Nonetheless, I will screenshot your text and send it to her. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And you respond, think you have to ask, correct?
Yes.
Why did you have to ask?
Due diligence.
So, first of all, Kim Quintero says, I do know she won't want to comment. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And subsequent to Kim saying, well, but I'll send her a screenshot anyway, did Senator Rogers or anybody else from her office reach out to you and say, yes, we would like to comment?
They did not.
You asked Senator Rogers a question that your own attorney characterized as outlandish as to whether or not she had accepted bribes from the Sinaloa drug cartel. And let me understand this correctly. The source of that allegation was somebody's boyfriend?
Somebody's boyfriend.
And you thought that on the basis that somebody's boyfriend had made this outlandish allegation, it made it appropriate for you to lob that question at Senator Rogers?
Senator Rogers was accused of a really serious crime, and I gave her the opportunity to comment. Yes.
Accused by somebody's boyfriend. An allegation that your own attorney described as outlandish, correct? When you went to the Tempe home, was there a sign that says media welcome?
No.
Was there a sign like that at the Chandler home?
No.
So I believe you described the Tempe home as having like a kind of like an adobe wall, but not necessarily a gate, correct?
Correct.
I have not had the privilege of being to Senator Rogers, any of her residences or any of her homes, but is there anything out there, personal property, maybe like a doormat or a pot or anything like that?
Not that I recall, but I can look at the image.
Well, let's just say hypothetically there was something out there, like a piece of personal property, like maybe like a piece of decorative property, or a decorative pot or something like that. Would it be okay for you just to pick it up and walk away with that? All right, and the fact that there's no gate doesn't impact that, does it?
No.
Stealing anyway, correct?
Correct.
And once again, you had no permission from Senator Rogers to be on the property there in Tempe, correct?
Correct.
You didn't enter the physical residence, but you were on the property itself, correct?
Correct.
And you went onto the patio where her front door was, correct?
The door step is not really a patio, but yes,
It's an overhang, correct?
I think so.
Thank you. Now, you were wearing your credentials when you did this, correct?
Yes.
Your Senate credentials?
Yes.
And you're not in the Senate, though, are you?
No.
Did you identify yourself to the electrician?
No.
Why not?
I didn't really need to talk to him.
Let me get this straight. You're conducting an investigation as to whether or not Senator Rogers actually lives in her district, but you didn't think you needed to talk to the electrician that was there or might have information?
Right.
sees plaintiffs at 1 and 2.
Plaintiff one is the petition?
No, I think the plaintiff one would be the other one.
Oh, okay. Just plaintiff one.
Ma'am, just so we're clear, in front of you is plaintiffs 1 and 2. I think you'd agree with me that that's you at both the Chandler home and the Tempe home
Yes.
the morning of April 18th.
Yes.
Isn't it true that you made your request to Pete, as you call him, Pete Galvin, after you got back from the Tempe residence and the Chandler residence?
Which request?
The request for her calendar for the past 4 weeks, as well as records returned. A request for her calendar.
The calendar, yes, I believe that was it.
What did you request her mileage reports?
I believe that was on the 17th.
Right. Did you make any other requests of Mr. Galvin after the 18th?
Oh, yeah.
Several, correct?
I don't think regarding Senator Rogers, but I email Pete all the time.
Anything else? Ma'am, I think you what has been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 6. You ever seen that document before?
I don't think so.
All right. It's dated May 29th of 2020, and it's from the office of Katie Hobbs back when she was Secretary of State, correct?
Correct.
This is on behalf of the State Elections Director, Bo Duell. Correct? All right. And this was in response to a complaint, and once again, Senator Rogers didn't live in her district. In all your reporting, you never came across this record in which the Secretary of State had already considered these allegations and found that there was no misconduct?
Not until now.
All right. Move to admit Plaintiff 6, Judge.
Any objection, Mr. Hempsey?
I don't think it's necessarily relevant to anything, so a relevancy objection. But
I'll admit it in spite of the objection. I don't know that it's relevant. I'll err on the side of much evidence. Any other questions?
Just, if I could just take one more accounting here, Judge. You marked the tweet from, I believe, this year, but not 2022, correct? That's correct. Okay. And ma'am, I'm handing you now what has been marked as Plaintiff 7. I just want to make sure we've got a full record here. Do you recognize that as the tweet that Senator Rogers sent out after your encounter with her in January of 2022?
Yes.
Move to admit Plaintiff 7, Judge.
Objection.
no objection.
Okay. Let me see it. I'll see it.
all the questions I have, Judge.
Do you have any?
Just briefly, Your Honor. You have Plaintiff 7 in front of you? No. Sorry. All right. So, on January 19, 2022, did you ambush the senator at her desk?
I talked to her, but I wouldn't say that I ambushed her.
And this was when you asked her to comment on the bill that she had sponsored?
2 bills.
2 bills that she had sponsored?
Yeah.
And then did you intrude in a private conversation with Sergeant at Arms?
She was talking to Joe, and I was waiting for them to finish talking to each other. And that's when she said something like, "This is private," or "This isn't for you."
And that's when Joe came over to you afterwards and said everything was fine?
No. She left, then I went to Joe. And I asked Joe.
And that's when Joe said everything was fine? You were asking questions regarding abiding by the Senate rules and the media rules and the media decorum and their applicability to places outside the Senate. Do you remember that line of questioning?
I do.
Okay. If you attended a public event outside of the Senate chamber that was attended by a number of members of the Senate, and you had an opportunity to talk to any of them, would you go find those Senate rules to find out whether you were allowed to go talk to them?
No.
So as you interpret it, the Senate rules govern your actions and your decorum and your conduct while within the Senate.
Yes.
Those are all the questions I have.
Okay, you may step down. Let me have that, please. Please. And
Thanks. Thanks, Chris.
Mr. Hennessy, is there anything else you wish to present?
I don't believe so, Your Honor.
Okay, are we ready for a closing argument?
Yes, Judge. You need to do that, or, yeah, absolutely, Judge. Are you ready, Judge?
Yes.
All right, Judge. Typically, you start off with a closing statement by saying, what the case is about, and I'm going to maybe deviate from that a little bit and say what the case is not about. This case is not about the First Amendment, nor is this case about whether or not Wendy Rogers resides in her district. This case is about whether or not the defendant, Cameron Sanchez, engaged in a series of acts over a period of time that are directed at a specific person and would cause a reasonable person to be seriously alarmed, annoyed, or harassed, and the conduct in fact seriously alarms, annoys, or harasses the person and serves no legitimate purpose. So let's go down to each one of those 4 elements. The first one, series of acts over time directed at a specific person. It appears the defense is attempting to argue that because Senator Rogers was not physically present at either the Chandler home or the Tempe home when Ms. Sanchez trespassed there, it's not conduct directed at a specific person. And I think, Judge, you'll find that in the case of LaFaro v. Cahill, our Supreme Court specifically declined to find that conduct not specifically in the presence of an individual can never constitute harassment. And I think common sense tells us otherwise. I don't think the defendant can seriously argue that simply because Wendy Rogers was not present at either home on the date she was there, it doesn't constitute an act directed at her. Both of those are the private residence of Wendy Rogers and her husband, and that is conduct directed at somebody. All right? Just in the same way that I don't need to be in my home for somebody to commit a burglary, Ms. Rogers, or rather Senator Rogers, does not have to be in her home for it to be an act directed at her. So that's a non-starter, Judge. The next question is, would a reasonable person be seriously alarmed, annoyed, or harassed by this conduct? The answer is yes. Now, I will grant you that at times do journalists go around knocking on doors, asking questions? Sure they do. But that's not what this is, Judge. This is an instance in which Ms. Sanchez was told specifically to have no contact with Senator Rogers at her desk in the Senate. Furthermore,
she is told by the Senate communication, or the Senate Majority Communications Director, Ms. Quintero, saying that Senator Rogers does not wish to comment on this topic as to whether or not she lives in her district or not. And there's no evidence that there was any follow-on engagement from Senator Rogers' office saying, oh, sure, we'd like to talk about that. So Ms. Sanchez, knowing that she was not supposed to interact with Senator Rogers at her desk in the Senate, and then also told by the Majority Communications Director, Ms. Quinteros, that Senator Rogers would not wish to comment on this issue, the defendant nevertheless went to both private residences of Senator Rogers without permission, by her own admission to, among other things, interview her. I think any reasonable person would consider that to be, if not alarming, certainly annoying and harassing. When somebody is put on notice, hey, leave me alone, that means leave me alone. If somebody comes to my office and I say, get out of here, I don't want you coming to my office, that doesn't mean that they get to go meet me at my home later. It means leave me alone. And it is absolutely unreasonable for the defendant to come in here and argue and say, well, nobody told me I couldn't go to her house. That's preposterous, Judge. Just as Ms. Sanchez wouldn't want me or somebody else showing up at her private residence, no reasonable person wants somebody you've told to stay away from you.
You sent a process server to her private residence. Right?
I did.
Okay.
I did. That's court process, Judge.
Was there a welcome process server sign at her house?
There wasn't, Judge, but that's a process server, though. That's court process.
All right.
It was at the office.
Yeah, that's court process, Judge. And more importantly, no one's ever come to me and said, hey, stay away from me, or Ms. Sanchez has no comment. That's court process, Judge. That's different. But honestly, I think if the point is that people don't like being bothered at their private residences, I get it. And sometimes that's what process servers have to do, to serve process. But that's not what we're talking about here, Judge. We're talking about whether or not Cameron Sanchez had permission to go to Wendy Rogers' private residence in both Chandler and Tempe. And for the record, Judge, once, well, I'll just leave it at that. Going on to the next element, whether or not it in fact seriously alarms, annoys, or harasses the person in question, I think you've received ample evidence from Senator Rogers that element is in fact met. The injunctions against harassment are not an exercise in saying the magic words at the hearing in front of the judge. I think the colloquy of the discussion with the judge that issued the injunction shows that Senator Rogers was in fact alarmed, annoyed, and harassed by this. And then finally, does the conduct, whether it serves no legitimate purpose. There is no legitimate purpose to entering onto somebody's private property when they've told you they don't want to have anything to do with you, when the Senate Communications Director has said she has no comment. There is no legitimate purpose there than to show up and see if you can ask them questions. Now, nothing here restricts Cameron Sanchez from reporting about Senator Rogers. Nothing restricts her here from making public records requests. Nothing restricts her from going to neighbors and knocking on doors, although I think they'd probably find that annoying themselves. But what we're talking about here is the fact that she went to 2 private residences without permission, knowing that Wendy Rogers, Senator Wendy Rogers, did not want to have any engagement with her. And that was made perfectly clear to her. And once again, it is absolutely unreasonable for anyone to infer that simply because nobody said, but stay away from her house, that meant that her personal homes were fair game. So with that in mind, Judge, we believe the injunction should be upheld. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
So apparently now reporters need permission to do their job in the eyes of the plaintiff. The plaintiff suggests that this isn't a case about the First Amendment. This is absolutely a case about the First Amendment. The injunction that was issued on the 19th of April should have never been issued in the first place, and certainly should be dismissed today. First and foremost, the court need not determine at this juncture whether the petition filed by Senator Rogers constitutes a legal action for purposes of Section 751, which is the anti-SLAPP statute in the state of Arizona. We don't even have to get down that path.
Anti-what statute?
Anti-SLAPP. When Section 751, when a public official files an active action to shut down First Amendment activity.
Oh, okay.
So because in the context of that statute, the burden for a public official, burden shifts to the public official that they have to prove that they didn't understand why this thing was happening. We know that that can't be established. Senator Rogers herself said that she recognized that the information requested, the tweet that occurred, or the text that occurred on April 17th looking into these issues. So the notion that Senator Rogers didn't understand what it was that my client was doing is a non-starter. How pleased Senator Rogers must have been to have been able to go to court and to weaponize the concept of an injunction against harassment. This is not about the typical concept of injunction against harassment in the manner in which it's necessary to potentially protect individuals. And you read through the statute and the areas that are described and the carve-outs for things like when residences are shared and family issues. The concepts behind injunction against harassment are along those lines. And what Senator Rogers decided to do was to take something that is intended to be a shield and turn it into a weapon. And you can tell that from the very petition that was filed by the senator under oath. This isn't just about residences. This is all just an after-the-fact way to cover the conduct that took place on the 19th. The specific request that was made on the 19th, on number 6, page 2 of the petition, defendants should be ordered to stay away from these locations at all times, even when I am not present. Checkbox residence, checkbox work. Senator Rogers explained in the course of the hearing that School Other was her attempt to try and check boxes on her phone, and it didn't work very well. But she specifically acknowledged during the hearing on the 19th that her intention was to prohibit Cameron Sanchez from being at the state Senate even when the senator wasn't there. This has nothing to do with protecting residences. This has everything to do with stopping the state Senate reporter for a newspaper in Phoenix from doing her job by going to the place where she's the only reporter in the state who that's her only job. And Senator Rogers tried to stop that from happening. Even more so,
didn't succeed in stopping that.
I understand that. Great point, Your Honor. She didn't succeed in stopping that from happening because the judge who heard it at the time seized on that notion because Senator Rogers recognized that my client works there. The judge said, before I walk down that path, I'd like to have a hearing, no order in place at the time, I'd like to have a hearing that involves all sides to talk this through, which then would mean that my client would have an opportunity to come explain herself, and Senator Rogers said, no, I'll pass on that. I'll just take the injunction with respect to residences, as I think she called it, some sort of a fair compromise. The fact that all of the texts and the tweets and the press releases after the fact to try and describe this concept of fear and threatening and all these things, none of that stuff came up in the hearing. If that were really the issue, that would have come up in the course of the hearing. And this notion that if knocking on a door is trespass, then Senator Rogers admitted under oath to trespassing tens of thousands of times. It can't be. And in fact, on that point, I received today by email I wouldn't call it a belatedly filed bench memo, but I'll call it a belatedly filed bench memo, filed today and provided to the court today regarding the First Amendment and what plaintiff claims to be, this is not a case of First Amendment, and citing two cases, one from the Southern District of Iowa and one from the Ninth Circuit, regarding how the First Amendment doesn't forgive trespassing. They have these great just sort of nuggets about those cases without actually talking about what the cases really involve. And I think it's important for the court to understand what those cases really involve. The first case, Animal Legal Defense Fund versus Reynolds, 297 F sub 3rd 901, Southern District of Iowa, 2018. Over the course of time in the state of Iowa, a number of individuals from a number of organizations, and I don't mean to pick on PETA, but it's the only acronym I remember, including PETA, had started to obtain access to agricultural facilities in the state of Iowa under false pretenses. They would submit job applications pretending as though they were interested in working there, and then they would sneak into these places, not sneak in, they would be admitted to these places having lied to get the job, and they would go around inside these agricultural locations filming events that they considered to be violations of animal rights, animal ethics. And so the state of Iowa passed a law that said that you cannot obtain access to agricultural production facilities under false pretenses. And somebody challenged that, a number of organizations challenged that, including PETA, saying this is a constitutional violation, we have a First Amendment right to do that. And the Iowa court, the federal court in Iowa said, you don't have a constitutional right to lie on an application, so we're not going to say that the First Amendment trumps this statute. So that's the first case that they cite of the two. The second, Dieteman, D-I-E-T-E-M-A-N versus Time, Inc., 449 F. 2nd 245 from the 9th Circuit in 1971, was an investigation by a Times reporter where they, and these are the words of the court, gained entrance, well, it's reference to gaining entrance to a residence. So the quote is, gaining entrance by subterfuge. A reporter made their way into a home by subterfuge, whatever that means in the opinion of the court, with a hidden camera, and recorded a discussion that was transmitted by a hidden radio transmitter to somebody who was outside. Those are the two cases the plaintiff cites to suggest that the First Amendment doesn't trump trespassing. One involves a statute regarding agriculture.
Just to cut you off.
Yes.
This doesn't come close to trespassing.
Okay.
But,
thank you, Your Honor.
Sanchez did.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. So in order to meet the statutory definition of harassment, as plaintiff pointed out, there are several elements. There are 4 elements, and the ands are important for each of them. And the first element is a series of events. We don't have a series of events. We just don't. That which occurred in the Senate and the exchanges that took place can't qualify as a series of events. We have a reporter for the Senate asking questions of a state senator. There was no contrary testimony regarding the question that it was that Ms. Sanchez asked regarding Senate bills. And if this court's going to interpret a reporter asking a sitting senator about legislation they sponsored as being the first in a series of harassing events, then it's complete restrictions on the First Amendment. It's complete prior restraint on the ability of a reporter to do their job if the court's going to consider that exchange. And there was no testimony from the senator that that wasn't the question that was asked. There was no testimony from the senator regarding I was asked something different or asked something else. So that can't count in the series of events because asking a senator about a bill that they sponsored, they might not want to talk about it, but it doesn't fit in the caption of annoying or harassing of a reasonable person or any reasonable senator who sponsored a bill and then is asked at the Senate location, do you want to talk about the bill you sponsored? So that can't fit into a series of events. The second incident, there's testimony regarding the question that was asked, and someone might be offended by the question. It's entirely possible. But as Ms. Sanchez explained, there's a reason behind it of events that took place at the Senate floor, presumably of which Senator Rogers was a participant and observant, in which her name is specifically raised, in which another senator's name was raised, and the very same question was asked of Ms. Rogers and asked of that other senator, and that other senator answered the questions and moved on. And so we would suggest that that's not also in the series of events. The definition of the statute is of a reasonable person, not a more sensitive person or a person who gets upset more frequently. That's not in the statute. It's a reasonable person. And we would suggest that the response that took place by the other senator that actually answered the very same essential question suggests that Senator Rogers' response was not reasonable, and ultimately she just walked away. And so that can also qualify in a series of events, which now leads to the issues with respect to the residences and the visiting of the residences, which, as Your Honor acknowledged, isn't trespassing. She explained the concept, my client explained the concept of the legitimate purpose, which is the final nail in the coffin in this injunction, the legitimate purpose behind the investigation. And the investigation being seeing a list of those senators with higher amounts of per diem. One name stood out to her as someone with whom my client has testified, unopposed, that she had heard information associated with questions associated with residency. Plaintiff suggests that somehow this other previous investigation regarding campaign finance is definitive. All that shows is that the questions have been out there for a long time, not that they've been definitively answered. And so my client explained the legitimate purpose behind the steps that she took to go to the residences and to see what she could see. As she testified, she wasn't necessarily expecting to find Senator Rogers there, given the fact that Senator Rogers is the senator from Flagstaff and Senate was on break. That decreases the chances that the senator is going to be at her Tempe home. And so Ms. Sanchez already testified as to what it is, despite counsel trying to encourage her to say, you wanted an interview, you wanted an interview. Well, if she was there, of course she'd talk to her. And if Senator Rogers said, leave, she would have left. But the concept that a reporter can't go in furtherance of their investigation and that that's going to now be in control by an individual in this notion of prior restraint who's going to come in and get an injunction, that just completely shuts down the concept of the First Amendment ability of a reporter to do their job, as she testified. Everything my client did was in the context of her work as the State Senate reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times. And everything about this injunction, from the petition filed to the testimony given to the injunction itself, is completely contradictory to the First Amendment. It is absolutely a prior restraint. There is an interesting colloquy that occurs during the course of the exchange on the 19th, where the judge is trying to explain, I think, the way that the injunction is written. It doesn't say no contact. It says no contact. It doesn't say no harassment. So the judge was trying to explain what that meant. And Senator Rogers says, essentially, she can't contact me. And the judge tried to explain, well, it means she can't harass you, even though the order itself does say no contact. And that, frankly, is the most damaging part of the order that was entered. The most damaging part is that if my client were at her place of work and Senator Rogers were at her place of work and with a group of other senators, and my client went to go ask questions, she could arguably be in violation of that order. The notion that my client would have to walk around the Senate floor on pins and needles with what is essentially the sword of Damocles hanging over her head, approaching Senator Rogers, simply can't exist under the First Amendment, and simply is a complete misuse of the injunction against harassment. The plaintiff has failed at every turn to meet the necessary elements. The injunction should have never been entered in the first place, and the step that this court should take is to write that and to vacate the injunction immediately today.
Okay. Any last word, Mr. Fishbaum?
Yes, briefly, Judge. We don't have to prove trespass, Judge. We just have to prove harassment. And the point of all these cases that I cited is that the First Amendment is not a blanket grant of immunity, and it's not a blanket grant of impunity. If somebody makes it clear to you that they don't want to answer questions on a particular topic and they want to be left alone, and you nevertheless show up at their private residence to ask them questions on that very topic twice, that's harassment. That's harassment both in the subjective view, it's harassment in both the objective view. The idea that the defendant was not there to interview Senator Rogers or potentially her husband is just simply untenable. What else was she going to do on the property? Break into it? I mean, she was there to ask questions of either Senator Rogers or her husband. And I would submit to you, even if that was her purpose, potentially to interview her husband, that is just as harassing. If Senator Rogers says, look, I don't want to talk to you about this topic, that doesn't make it okay for you to show up at that person's private residence and start interrogating their spouse. In any event, the defendant admitted that that was part of her goal there, was to interview Senator Rogers. I mean, no matter what else goes on here, Judge, she eventually admitted that under oath, that was one of her goals by going to Senator Rogers' residence, was to ask her questions on a subject that she did not want to discuss, and the defendant knew she did not want to discuss. And once again, the second the defendant was on notice that Senator Rogers did not wish to communicate with the defendant on that topic, her purpose for being there lost any sense of legitimacy, regardless if she was there to talk to Senator Rogers or her husband. And what I think is particularly telling there, judges, note how she didn't ask a single question of the electrician. I mean, she could have asked him questions, all types of questions about whether or not Senator Rogers lived there and her activity and going to and fro. She didn't ask a single question, Judge.
It was the house that was being built.
That's correct.
So
but she didn't ask.
I don't think that Senator Rogers lived there.
But Judge, the point is she didn't ask a single question.
And that underscores that she wasn't there to just, generally collect information. She was there looking to confront Senator Rogers over these topics that she'd been told Senator Rogers did not want to discuss with her. Now, relative to the way the order is constructed about the no contact, I agree with you. The judge who issued the order, I think a fair interpretation of that is it wasn't necessarily prohibiting any contact, it was prohibiting harassment.
It does prohibit any contact.
It does, Judge, and I think if you look at the
term. Preceding that, it says, shall not harass.
Yeah.
But the box is checked, shall not contact.
And Judge, I didn't check the box, and I don't think Senator Rogers did either. We have no objection to the court clarifying, I think, what the judge that issued the order meant, which is, you cannot have any contact to the extent it is harassment. We have no objection to that point of
There's already laws
clarification.
against harassment.
Well, I know, Judge, but I'm just saying that.
You don't need an injunction for that.
Well, Judge, again, the point was made by this court, or the prior judge that issued the order, what the court's intent was there, and I'm just suggesting that the court, its ruling conformed to that. In any event, there is no reason that Cameron Sanchez should ever be going to either the Tempe home, the Flagstaff home, or the Chandler home at this point in time. And that part of the injunction absolutely, positively should remain in place.
Okay, thank you. Counsel Hennessy said that all the elements fail. I think that the element that Senator Rogers was seriously alarmed, annoyed, or harassed by Cameron Sanchez showing up on her various front porches is genuine. I think she subjectively was. Whether a reasonable person would be harassed, brings me back to that process server analogy. That nobody wants some pesky process server dragging them down, but it's part of the process. They have to be served if they're going to be subpoenaed or summoned. And while the individual may not like it and may feel harassed or violated, that's the way it goes for that person. And when somebody knocks on your door and there's no trespassing sign and there's no directive to leave, they're allowed to. I couldn't see in these ring shots if there was a welcome mat, which might indicate everybody's welcome. Kids come on Halloween and knock on doors. I've knocked on thousands of doors in my elections, as have you, Senator Rogers. And unless there's a sign that says no trespassing, or a homeowner says you must leave, then you're allowed to knock on the door and try to engage them in conversation. And I don't think that those visits to the house meet the objective test for harassment. I don't think, and I agree with Mr. Hennessy, that asking a senator when the gavel has fallen and it's protocol to approach senators at that time, asking her about, Senate bills that she, sponsored, was an ambush. There was no testimony other than a tweet about an ambush, and it didn't sound like an ambush, and it wasn't, Ms. Sanchez's version of those events that happened on the Senate floor were not contradicted by Senator Rogers. So I don't think there is a series of events, a series of acts directed at Senator Rogers that would cause a reasonable person to be seriously alarmed, annoyed, or harassed, even if she in fact was. And the real, where this injunction really must be dismissed, the strongest point is that investigative reporting is a legitimate purpose. It just is. And you may not like the questions that are asked to you, and you went through, you achieved having her not contact you at your desk in the Senate. You achieved that in the Senate. Investigative reporting is a legitimate purpose. And sometimes when a judge hears just one side of an injunction,
Like, I can give you an example of something that happened to me this year. Somebody came in, said, this guy I know, a little bit from my work, is surreptitiously taking photos of me at the gym where I'm working out, and on a number of occasions. So I was sufficiently creeped out and issued an injunction against harassment that, among other things, barred the guy from the gym. He requested, he asked for a hearing to contest it, and he points out that, yeah, I know her, yeah, I was taking pictures. She worked in her position for a very short period of time, like a number of days, and left claiming workers' comp injury, an on-the-job injury. And so when I saw her at the gym, I was taking photographs to show my employer to help my company, against this, bogus workers' comp complaint. There's a legitimate purpose. Even though when she came in, I thought, oh man, this is a sex thing. This is some creepo taking photos. When push came to shove and I was able to hear both sides, there was a legitimate purpose there. And there is certainly a legitimate purpose, as protected by the First Amendment, in investigative reporting. So I am going to dismiss the injunction. You're certainly free to, you're certainly free, Senator Rogers, to advise anybody that they're not welcome at your house, and then it becomes a criminal trespass if they come to your house. You're free to do that yourself or through your counsel, and you can protect your home that way. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on with death threats. Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked. With public figures, there's a lot going on. And I understand that you were genuinely feeling annoyed, harassed, violated by this, but it doesn't meet the reasonable person test to me. And there was a legitimate purpose in my mind, so I'm going to dismiss this.
Yeah. If I could, Judge, since we're on the record,
Yes.
on behalf of Senator Rogers, we do have that request that Cameron Sanchez and any other journalist reading this.
Notify every other journalist.
Well, I'm notifying you.
Or she could, have her a no trespassing.
Any in the room here today.
Take away the welcome mat.
Any in the room here today to include Ms. Sanchez that she is not welcome at any private residence of Senator Rogers. Do I have that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, okay. You've done that. I don't know how effective it was, except to Cameron Sanchez.
No,
But there is a record of it.
there is.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have to confer with my client. I believe that we will be submitting a petition for costs under Section 12-1809P of the statute for cost of reasonable attorney fees.
Yeah, you can do that, but I don't think this was frivolous, and I don't